Story 1.
I discovered my wife cheating with my wealthy boss on a private island, leading to a painful divorce. I gazed at my wife of 5 years and declared, "Aaron, it's either him or me, no middle ground." She sat beside my supposed boss, Plato Giannis, grasping his well-groomed hand until I spoke. As I uttered those words, she withdrew her hand, confusion and fear etching her beautiful face. She shook her head in surprise, causing her blonde hair to gleam in the lamp. "Just for the weekend," she said. "Come Monday, everything returns to normal. Can't you enjoy some time with Elle for now?" Elle is Elle Logan, real name Ellen Johnson, now seated next to me. Had been fervently trying to seduce me for the past few hours. A striking woman with luscious dark hair and one of the most enviable bodies globally, especially if you appreciate curves, which I certainly do. Rumors also circulate that she's top-notch. It's all part of Plato's gesture. When Aaron and I were invited to this island for a weekend, the assumption was that he wanted to familiarize himself with me better. I'm a renowned author, and he acquired the publishing company that released my work about 3 months ago. However, the entire weekend was actually orchestrated for Plato to have relations with my wife. I'm an average writer, penning detective novels and thrillers featuring my protagonist, Rick Rocker. He unravels mysteries of locked rooms and takes daring leaps off cliffs to elude lunatics. His bed life is diverse and exciting, effortlessly charming beautiful women, a martial arts expert, and a trained assassin. He's a jack of all trades, a fantasy wrapped in a thin layer of reality. My books sell reasonably well, though the publishing house boasts several more significant and better-selling authors. I only have a captivating wife who caught Plato's attention. They crossed paths at a grand dinner and dance organized by Mr. G for his group of writers and editors. The event made an impression on Aaron, especially when she danced with Mr. G to multiple musical numbers. Polished and a decade senior to 28-year-old Aaron, he possessed long dark hair and a commanding presence. Observing their dance, I noted his adept movements. When the group took a break, they returned to our table, and Mr. G expressed admiration for Aaron, stating that she danced beautifully. I merely nodded, and my lack of response momentarily puzzled him. He then mentioned attending to other guests, saying it was a pleasure. Aaron smiled and reciprocated with Plato. I scrutinized her, noting the swift transition from Mr. G to Plato. I inquired if she was impressed with my boss, to which she replied positively, accompanied by a lascivious grin. I suggested, "Let's see whose wife he manages to snag, huh?" She turned out to be the wife of one of the editors, and during the evening, 3 more revealed they were editors' wives. All of this unfolded a month ago. I am Donald Lake, and I have no nickname. Standing at about 6 feet and weighing 169 lbs, I have curly brown hair, blue eyes, and am 30 years old. I am in good physical shape and athletic. Aaron, too, is in good shape and practices fencing, a sport of skill and coordination. It was at a fencing lesson she taught that I first met her. I was conducting the usual research for Rick, who was to engage in sword fights in the next book, The Adventurer. I always undertake extensive research before writing an adventure book, a key selling point of mine. Rick doesn't do anything I haven't tried. My journey to becoming a writer was an ascent up a steep staircase. I graduated from high school and did not pursue formal education thereafter. In fact, since I was 10, I recognized myself as a writer. Throughout school, I penned story after story, with 2 published in obscure literary magazines during high school. Despite considering myself a serious writer, the need to work for a living arose after finishing school. I worked as a car mechanic, which I enjoyed, however, it didn't pay much, prompting me to start writing thrillers. Miraculously, one sold, followed by another and another. My current publisher signed me after receiving my first Rick Rocker novel. Sally Baker became my editor, and we quickly found common ground, a sweetheart but deeply married. She had elementary school-aged children. While working on the second Rocker book, I met Aaron. I completed the book after receiving advice from her about a sword duel, and our professional relationship evolved into several dates, eventually leading to closeness. Our connection was immediate, and we both were delighted. At the time, Aaron operated her music store, surviving the initial stages of starting a business thanks to loans from a family trust. The store featured various instruments in one section, and recordings of diverse music along with sheet music in the other. So, fencing is just a hobby. When we got married, she was 23, and I was as happy as I thought it was possible to be happy. We had plans for children, and very soon, but my publishing house was sold to Mr. G, or Plato, as Aaron calls him. One day, Aaron came home excited, mentioning that next weekend, Plato had invited us to his island. I stared at her, questioning why she was telling me instead of him. Aaron explained that she ran into him last week, had lunch, and gave him a tour of the store. Today, he called with an invitation, expressing his desire to get to know the writers better, suggesting he would be in contact with me soon. Curious, I asked if he had been in contact with her and others. She reassured me, denying any inappropriate contact. I insisted on knowing why she didn't mention the lunch and shopping until today, and she admitted that he had made advances, but she blew him off. She kept quiet, thinking I might get in trouble given his ownership of the company. Now, with my apparent enthusiasm for the island visit, Aaron disclosed that it would be just the two of us and a special friend of his, along with the staff, to get to know us better. I remarked cynically about his intentions to get to know everyone. Aaron reassured me, stating that she could handle the situation and questioned if I was sure I could handle it. I assured her that everything would be great. However, I firmly declared my decision to decline the invitation, deeming it too dangerous for us. Aaron pleaded for reconsideration, expressing that we would have fun, but I remained resolute, apologizing for my decision. She sulked for the rest of the evening. The next day, I called the main office and requested to speak with Mr. G. He returned my call 15 minutes later, expressing anticipation for our weekend on the island. I declined, stating my discomfort. I mentioned that it seemed my wife knew about it before me, having had lunch with him, and she didn't inform me initially. According to her, he had been pestering her, and she was concerned about my reaction if I knew everything. He acknowledged his appreciation for Aaron on various levels, citing her attractiveness and entrepreneurial qualities. He also mentioned my status as one of his most profitable writers. He claimed a desire to get to know both of us better. Despite his efforts, I maintained my stance, apologizing and asserting that it would not work. Disappointed, he expressed regret and stated that he wished I would change my mind. He mentioned keeping the weekend open. At that point, we parted ways. About 3 hours later, as I finished the next Rick book, my agent, Brock Levan, contacted me. I inquired about how he knew about my declining Mr. G's invitation. Brock explained that the vice president of sales had called him, insisting that I should attend. He conveyed the potential consequences of under-advertising the new book, which would be detrimental to both of us financially. I questioned if there was a direct threat, and Brock clarified that while not explicit, the threat was implied, emphasizing that Mr. G played a tough game. I assured Brock that I would be in touch. After ending the call, I emailed Sally the conclusion of the new book along with some instructions. Later, she called and we discussed the situation. In the meantime, I delved into researching Plato Yanis and his island. The island was named Hedonism, meaning pleasure in Greek, essentially Pleasure Island. As I delved deeper, I uncovered numerous stories of coital misconduct on the island, including 2 divorce cases where the island was cited as a factor. However, these stories were published in gossip sources. Several photographs of Mr. G with women, including 2 married ones, raised serious concerns for me. I located a picture of the place on Google Maps and familiarized myself with the entire layout. Situated off the coast of North Carolina among islands popular for golf and beach holidays, this 2-mile-long and approximately 1-mile-wide island faces south and is shielded from the elements. It boasts 2 piers, multiple buildings including a large house, tennis courts, and a swimming pool, leaving me puzzled about the need for a pool with great beaches around. I downloaded detailed photos and compiled them into a topographic map, concluding that a decent boat or seaplane would be necessary for the journey. Lacking both, I know people who possess them. On that Friday evening, Aaron returned home promptly, appearing joyful. For dinner, I had a substantial chicken salad and white wine. As Aaron changed, she mentioned hearing that I might have reconsidered not going to the island. I looked at her, remembering Plato's mention of changing one's mind. At lunch, she clarified, "No, silly. He's in New York and we're here in good old Virginia." He called me, mentioning his apartment in Milan. Questioning how she knew he was in New York, I was met with a dismissal of paranoia. Aaron explained that Plato suggested ordering his plane from the national airport if we agreed to go. But I reiterated that I hadn't changed my mind. Frustrated, Aaron called me stubborn and suggested she could go alone. But I expressed concerns about enjoying myself and fearing potential divorce. I inquired about the possibility of her sleeping with him, to which Aaron responded that she wouldn't go without me. I questioned how I could let her go alone, emphasizing potential consequences upon her return and the risk of our relationship being jeopardized. Aaron affirmed her attraction but assured me that we were still passionate and she wouldn't take the risk. Believing her, I asked if she believed it, to which she replied not to believe her at all, acknowledging that my trust was almost empty. An accidental spill of wine during this conversation led to laughter, hugs, and kisses, culminating in a trip upstairs lasting an hour. The unpleasant topic faded as we lay in bed. Aaron asserted she wouldn't risk our relationship for a billionaire, seemingly assuming that we would go to the island. Erin commented that it was decided, tensing but not elaborating further. I inquired about her eagerness for the trip, urging her to provide the truth. After a moment of silence, she explained that it seemed exciting to communicate with such an important and influential person. She quickly clarified that she didn't mean to be with, but rather communicate. Reflecting on the situation, I noted that he was born into wealth and significantly increased his fortune, having a substantial head start. Similar to me, he pursued relationships with women. Despite my concerns, Erin affirmed her belief that everything would be good and fun. Considering that we were on the verge of trying for children, I recognized that this could be a potential time for Erin to stray. Doubting her honesty, I reluctantly agreed to the trip, warning Erin that if she ended up with this guy, it would be irreversible. She acknowledged the warning, expressing her gladness about the decision. Deciding that this warning was my last, I saw it as a test of her worthiness as a wife. Temptation would reveal the truth, and time would be the judge. The following day, I accepted the invitation and made contingency plans with my friend. I also checked the island's cellular communication availability. It was there. Still, as a precaution, I brought my satellite phone. The small plane from the national airport landed at a small airport, greeted by a man named Simon. He took us to the pier, where we boarded a boat with a comfortable cabin and a powerful engine, driven by another man, Charlie. After about 40 minutes, we docked at the island. Erin and I spent time exploring the ocean and other islands. Simon briefed us on our location and island activities. He was a friendly, muscular guy with a wonderful smile and laugh, larger than me. Approaching the north side pier with Erin leading the way, Simon commented that I didn't seem very happy with the trip and suggested calling me Don. I acknowledged having doubts, considering Simon's 6 years of working for Mr. G, expecting him to understand my reservations. When Simon inquired about why I came if I was so worried, I explained it was to see what happens. I also asked if he was Mr. G's bodyguard, to which Simon confirmed, mentioning his presence was just a precaution, although Mr. G was capable of handling himself. Curious about Simon's preparedness, I asked if he was armed. Simon mentioned having a knife but clarified that weapons were not allowed on the island. Expressing my distrust of the island's rules, I admitted to not being a very trusting person these days. Simon assured me that no firearms were needed, emphasizing that I wouldn't require one, no matter what happened. The boat pressed tightly against the pier, and Simon, along with a young man on the pier, secured it. Erin received Simon's hand, and I disembarked from the boat, noticing Simon's slight worry. Following Simon's direction, I accompanied Erin toward the substantial house. Upon our arrival, Mr. G greeted us, dressed casually in swimming trunks and a sleeveless shirt. Ella, considered the most beautiful woman in the world, accompanied him. I observed her, discovering who else would join us. It became apparent that she was Helen Johnson from Jonestown, the semi-official mistress on the island and in several houses owned by Mr. G. Though she was once seen in the company of other noblemen, it occurred less frequently now. Mr. G seemed to have secured an exclusive agreement, at least in some way. Mr. G extended his hand to shake. Ella hugged Erin, and then Mr. G embraced both Erin and Ella. She smelled delightful during the hug, and her lips touched my ear. We were escorted to a large room and offered drinks. Despite the one afternoon timing and a light plain snack, a small buffet awaited us. Opting for sparkling water, I abstained from drinking, while Erin chose wine. They both sampled a small selection from the buffet. During this, Mr. G inquired about the new book I had sent to Sally the previous week. Assuring him it was on schedule, Mr. G complimented my punctuality with a smile. Ella, having read all my books, expressed anticipation for the thriller involving rock climbing, flying small planes, and a love interest. She exclaimed, "I cannot wait, maybe I can watch it sooner." Mr. G supported this idea, turned to Erin, and inquired about the music business. After Erin's positive response, I humorously mentioned Marjorie's new book, predicting it would sell well. Marjorie, known as Marjorie Wright, wrote serious fiction but still sold a lot of books. Mr. G revealed Marjorie's rising sales and reminded me of my obligation for another book, to which I affirmed my ongoing work on a Christmas-themed mystery. Ella suggested moving on and proposed going for a swim. Mr. G promptly stood up, encouraging us to join him, and ran out the door. Ella mentioned that if we had swimsuits, she would show us to our room to change. The three of us stood up, and Ella led us into a large double bedroom, closing the door behind us. In the room, we changed into swimsuits. I opted for regular trunks, while Erin chose a skimpy pink bikini. I expressed my opinion that the situation was excessive and questioned who Erin was trying to impress. She responded that she just wanted to look good, mentioning Ella's beauty. I countered, telling her she was no less beautiful, although she disliked my tone. Erin refrained from responding. Upon descending, Ella wore an electric blue bikini, similar in size to Erin's. I found both of them entirely enamoring. Exiting, we walked to the south side beach on a wooden path. Mr. G was already in the water, swimming behind the breakwaters. Erin conveyed her reluctance to swim that far, a sentiment shared by Ella, who shuddered. Despite this, I dove into the surf, swam to where Mr. G was using his crawl, and joined him. He was a proficient swimmer for his size, easily matched by my water-friendly body type. Sometimes changing strokes, we swam until he tired, and I followed him back to shore. As we approached, a large wave knocked him off his feet, and I picked him up. He spat out seawater and sand, and I held him tightly as we walked out. His legs seemed like wet noodles, likely from overextending himself in our swimming competition. Quickly regaining composure, he pulled away, stating that he was fine and the wave had taken him by surprise. Approaching the sunbathing women, I inquired who wanted to swim. Ella immediately stood up, her top slipping slightly as she raised her hand. Both of us ran to the surf. Erin declined, so I pursued Ella. The rear view was impressive. She dove in like an Olympian, swimming beyond the breakwaters. I followed her, amazed at her. Superior swimming compared to Mr. G. Swimming alongside for a distance, she suggested, "Let's turn," which I did. Intrigued by the glimpse of flesh, I let her get about 4 meters ahead, observing her from the side. She turned over, floated on her back, and her chest swayed in and out of the water, an absolutely amazing woman. Given my proficiency in backstroke, I joined her, swimming alongside until she declared, "I've had enough," and swam back to the shore. Pausing briefly to glance at her from behind upon surfacing from the waves, Erin and Mr. G were nowhere in sight. But my attention shifted to my snug swimming trunks. She joked about me being Superman, and I chuckled, suggesting there was only one way to find out. Taking a step toward me, she halted, stating that we couldn't do this here, no matter how much she wanted it. With that, she turned and ran. On land, she couldn't match her speed in the water, allowing me to easily catch up, and we proceeded to the veranda. Ours were missing, leaving me to ponder if this had already transpired. Ella inquired about my profession, asking if I really wrote. Confirming, I explained how I aimed for believability in Rick's actions. Ella stared momentarily, diminishing my hardness, but as expected, it returned. She possessed a commanding presence. I firmly told Ella to back off, emphasizing my marital status and expressing a desire to keep it that way. I asked her as a favor not to pursue anything further. Ella laughed, labeling me a tongue-tied writer. I muttered, "Oh my God," and suggested checking on Erin and Mr. G. I asked if it mattered to her, and she expressed interest, to which I replied, "Oh yeah, please." I then conveyed to Ella that I wanted her to understand I wouldn't be sleeping with her over the weekend. I explained that whatever Erin decided to do, if they reached that point, I would leave. I acknowledged that I would likely long regret what I had just said, all while smiling as Ella warned me that it wasn't easy to shake her off her tail. She entered the house. I waited a few minutes before following her. When I went upstairs to change clothes, I found no one. However, upon entering our room, I heard the shower running, which abruptly stopped as soon as it registered no voices. Erin opened the door, wrapped in a towel. She gasped upon seeing me and asked if Ella had already got to me. I assured her that Ella hadn't, and explained that I wasn't going with her. I expressed hope that Erin wouldn't go with Mr. G either, reminding her that we had discussed the situation earlier. I inquired about what they had been doing while Ella and I were swimming. Erin informed me that Mr. G showed her around, pointing out the swimming pool, tennis court, and gym downstairs. She emphasized that there was no relationship activity involved. I acknowledged my belief that Mr. G wouldn't engage in such risky behavior, considering they didn't know how long Ella and I would be gone, and I suspected they had been watching us during our swim. Erin concurred, describing Mr. G as a gentleman. However, she expressed concern that sooner or later he would come for me. I admitted to the likelihood and added that Ella would come for her as well. Erin grinned, saying it wasn't very comforting but assured that she wouldn't give in, emphasizing that I shouldn't either. We discussed our plans for the evening, with Erin declaring that we had time for love after drinks and snacks at 5. She dropped the towel and I admitted I was still on edge because of Ella. We engaged privately, with genuine zeal, only realizing afterward that the windows were open. Erin remarked that it didn't matter, stating that they were married. Glancing out the window, Ella sat on a sun lounger about 6 meters away. She looked up, smiled, waved her hand, and then reached for her shorts. I distanced myself from the window. Erin noticed my renewed arousal and fixed her gaze on me. Glancing out the window, she remained entranced for a while. A groan emanated from outside. Aaron turned to me, exclaiming, "Oh my God, Donnie, forget about yourself. She can have me. I can give up on you. I will not give up." Aaron teased that I had to beg Ella to give up, claiming it was the only chance I had. I mentioned that I had already tried begging, but it didn't seem to work. I speculated that Plato had given Ella a task so he could have me. Finding the situation strange, but admitting it kept my interest, I promised Aaron that I wouldn't give in to Ella's advances, expressing gratitude for her help. Aaron observed that I was still erect and suggested that we could engage privately every 2 hours to alleviate the situation. We descended to the main room in casual attire, Docker shorts and a collared shirt for me, and Aaron in a dress with her hair down and high-heeled sandals. Mr. G was already there, sipping beer. He inquired about our swim with Ella, and I responded positively, praising Ella's swimming talents. Mr. G suggested I call him Plato, appreciating the famous name. He mentioned his father's fondness for reading about Plato. Ella joined us, also wearing a dress and heels. The dress seemed modest, but looked anything but on her. I sensed Aaron feeling a bit insecure, understanding it was part of the game. Ella attempting to outshine Aaron, who in turn would try to assert herself by winning Plato's attention. I moved closer to Aaron, putting my arm around her shoulders. Plato informed us about the available beverages and snacks, expressing a preference for pretzels. As he spoke, he ate one. The four of us chatted for a while, and then Ella took me to show me around the house, which I found impressive. I asked if Plato used the gym, and Ella confirmed, mentioning his preference for weightlifting. She pointed to the bench with a barbell and described it as heavy. I demonstrated a few swings with the barbell, with Ella watching intently from above. Ella mentioned that Plato only did 3 reps before resting, and as she spoke, she began breathing heavily. I decided to lift the barbell and did 8 more reps. Plato then commented on Ella's strengths, suggesting that her role for the weekend should be to seduce me so Plato could take care of Aaron. Ella acknowledged that similar tasks had occurred before, expressing her willingness to finish the job even if it wasn't usually very pleasant. She playfully asked if I would stop if she started begging. I was genuinely serious in my response, but she perceived it as a joke, stating that she wouldn't stop but would enjoy seeing me beg. Ella then ascended the stairs, and I waited for my hardness to subside before standing up. The 3 of them huddled together in the living room and conversed. When I entered, they fell silent, and Plato suggested I have something to drink, maybe beer. I glanced at the bar, walked over, extracted a bottle of Corona, and popped it open. The others had wine, and we chatted for a bit. I then asked if they had finished discussing their plot, or if I should leave, prompting an awkward silence. Ella's glance observed the others, mainly Aaron, who looked at Plato. Plato then stated that there were no secrets. At that moment, Simon came in and declared that dinner was served, leading us into the dining room where dishes were arranged on the buffet table. It was a familial serving style. We sat at one end of a large table. They poured water, but opted for my beer and refrained from water. Breaking the conversation, Plato addressed the tense situation I had created, and we engaged in friendly discussions about politics and baseball. Plato was a Yankees fan. Aaron and I rooted for the Orioles and Nationals. Ella liked the Pirates, being from Jonestown. Simon served dessert, tiramisu. I skipped mine. Plato seemed to notice. Aaron insisted that Plato not skip dessert, encouraging him to eat. Plato commented on keeping his waist in check and mentioned Aaron having no fat on her body, claiming to have observed her while swimming and noting her preference for beer over water. In response to Aaron expressing a lack of trust, Plato dismissed the idea of being medicated with something forbidden, considering it crazy. He encouraged me to eat and drink while pushing a glass of water and tiramisu towards me. I smiled and offered the same to Plato. However, he sat with a stony face and instructed Simon to clear the table. Simon noticed the change in the water and dessert arrangement, picked up my untouched glass of water and tiramisu, and carried them away. Ella suggested moving to the courtyard for music and dancing. Aaron and Plato remained silent. I stood up and extended my hand to Ella, leading her to the patio. Once there, she remarked on my apparent suspicion of Plato slipping something into the food and water. I acknowledged the possibility but noted that Plato hadn't taken either himself and had them removed by Simon. The others joined us and soft music started playing. I approached Aaron, took her by the elbow, and led her away from Plato into the open area. We danced, and although Aaron was initially shy, she eventually relaxed, pressing herself close to me. She whispered, "I love you, Donnie. Always." "I love you too, Aaron." We continued dancing. The music concluded, and we joined Plato and Ella at a table. Soon the music resumed, and Ella rose, offering her hand to me. She led me to the dance floor. We danced. Ella might have been the world's most captivating distraction. With her sweet, subtle fragrance and the contours of her body, she entranced me, eliciting immediate delight, as she always did. Observing Plato's hands on Erin's backside, I noted that she didn't push them away. Breaking away from Ella, I walked the short distance to Erin and Plato, standing there and observing them. Erin noticed and tried to move away from Plato, who persisted in keeping his hands on her. She gently pushed him on the chest, expressing a desire to avoid problems. Plato released her but took her hand, guiding her back to the table. Ella returned after me and we sat down, with her sitting very close to me. Erin held Plato's hand as they sat side by side. Plato expressed disappointment in me, claiming that Ella was a fantastic lover and could provide me with one of the most powerful and delightful experiences of my life. He accused me of denying her this opportunity. I asserted that I had a wife and wouldn't entertain the idea of a trade, bringing us back to the initial discussion. Turning to Erin, I stated that it was either him or me, with no intermediary options. She withdrew her hand from his but looked at me and suggested that it was only for the weekend, and on Monday. Everything would be back to normal. She asked if I couldn't have some fun with Ella for the time being. Scrutinizing her, I questioned if she was serious and if I should take it as a yes or no, even if it meant it would be over between us. I firmly stated my refusal with a simple no, despite not understanding why it should imply anything. I made it clear that I wouldn't entertain the idea. I extended my hand to her, and she took it. Pulling her towards me, I gave her the hottest kiss I could muster, running my hands up and down her body. Afterward, I pulled away, tears welling up in my eyes. I exhaled the words that nearly crushed me, stating, "The mere thought that you would agree to be with this guy means it's all over between us. It's done." I turned and headed for the stairs. She cried out, "No, Donnie, no." I reached the top of the stairs, grabbed my previously packed bag, and left through the back fire escape. I made the call and ran into the darkness, sobbing. While running, I still heard her screams. About 20 minutes later, I heard a plane. It landed near the southern dock, and my friend Todd Jacob swam up to me. Approaching him, with Plato and Simon emerging behind me, Plato exclaimed that there was no escape and suggested I stay to calm my wife down. Charging at me, I reached the pier. Plato, uncontrollable and unfit for a fight, splashed around in the water, shouting about firing me. Boarding the plane with Todd at the controls, we flew to a small lake near Dulles. A car was waiting for me there, and I paid Todd for the service. Heading home to Alexandria, the road was dark and desolate. Our house, too, was dimly lit. Upon entering, I surveyed the surroundings, photos of us in happier times, pictures of our relatives. In shock, I sat in a chair, gazing into space, and that's how I drifted off to sleep. At 8 in the morning, a car sound outside woke me up. I peered out and saw Erin stepping out of a rental car. She carried her bag to the door, unlocked it, and went inside. I stood and observed her, and she stood motionless, gazing at me. She looked awful, probably no better than me. She expressed that in her entire life, she had never messed up like that, and vowed never to do it again, not wanting to lose me. I shrugged in response. I confronted Erin, asking her what she thought would happen when she decided to let Plato use her. I questioned if she thought I wouldn't notice because of Ella. She admitted to being stupid and not anticipating the consequences. I inquired if Erin and Plato had set everything up, and she looked down, confessing that Plato suggested there might be a substitution when they got there. She foresaw it in advance, thinking she would say no, but I surprised her by agreeing with the condition that I go with Ella. She mentioned how much I seemed to desire Ella, and that the whole experience was intended as a sideshow to rekindle our marriage. I smiled in response. I questioned Erin about why she thought Plato would be better than me. She explained that he excited her, being older and stronger, and suggested that he knew what to do to win her over. She clarified that she never thought he would be better than me, just different. Concerned about the future, I asked how I could be sure this wouldn't happen again, considering there are many guys like Plato in the world. And he's still around. Erin insisted that she didn't mean to cheat and believed everything was right in front of me. She thought I would agree now since I had turned down Ella. Expressing my disappointment, I remarked that she wasn't the woman I met and married, emphasizing that the woman I knew wouldn't succumb to the advances of another guy. Erin pleaded to see what happens next and suggested we continue enjoying great lovemaking while acknowledging that we both missed it. She stood up and removed all her clothes, prompting me to think about turning away but ultimately not doing so. She led me upstairs. The only constant in our relationship, always present and likely to remain, is our complete coital compatibility. I let her go home, and 10 years later, I picked up our kids from the school bus, Jessica, who is 8, and Robert, who is 6. Helen, who is 3, doesn't attend school yet. As a stay-at-home writer, I had help and the opportunity to write. It took over a year before I trusted Erin enough to let her stop taking the pills, and when she did, our lovemaking life flourished. The idea of her getting pregnant excited us greatly. I closed my contract with the previous publisher, and Sally and I moved on to something else. The first book I wrote was about adventures on an island, closely mirroring reality. It sold a considerable number of copies, securing a movie deal that included my 3 previous books. Plato couldn't complain about having truths in the new book, where he was cast as Socrates and met a fitting fate. Erin now owns 2 stores that generate some income, while I earned substantially. Before fully accepting her back, Erin signed a post-nuptial agreement ensuring fidelity from both of us. With the school year underway, as I drove the 2 older kids home, a small red sports car arrived at our entrance. A remarkable pair of legs emerged, followed by the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen. The children excitedly ran up to her, shouting, "Aunt Helen!" She hugged them and fussed around, while young Helen welcomed her at the door. I poured her favorite drink, seltzer, and informed her that Erin would arrive soon. I mentioned preparing a high-calorie salad, concluding with, "But that's a completely different story. I'm Donald, aged 56, sharing my life for the first time. I'm married to Lauren, aged 45, and we have a 13-year-old daughter." This recount is from a few months ago. My wife, our daughter, and I were in Istanbul with a large group of 3 families, totaling around 16 people. As our trip concluded, we gathered at Istanbul Airport for our collective return to Chicago. With an 11-hour flight ahead, we conducted a group accounting session. Unexpectedly, our flight faced a 6-hour delay. Utilizing the time, we all headed to the lounge, finding it surprisingly empty. We were the sole occupants, engaging in lively conversation, sharing smiles, and reliving tales of Turkey and its delectable cuisine. Taking a brief smoke break, I returned after 15 minutes, walking towards my wife. Spotting a slender figure near her, my heart raced, not due to nicotine but an intense surge of emotions. The closer I got, the more my heart raced, transporting me back 2 decades to a moment of holding hands in a church, saying "I do," and embarking on a shared life. Suddenly, I snapped back to the lounge, informing my wife of my need for fresh air before walking out without acknowledging the woman talking to her. Outside, memories flooded back, bringing me to moments with Maria in Columbus, Georgia, by the Chattahoochee River. Closing my eyes, I revisited our love story from college to marriage. Maria, my life, has been the object of my affection since our college days. We married, moved in together, and embarked on a promising married life. My journalism career and her role as a financial expert led to frequent travels, yet we maintained our connection. Maria's sparkling eyes brightened my days, and when at home, our time was filled with love and delicious meals she prepared. The initial 2 years of marriage were seamless, with no signs of trouble in paradise. We postponed having children to establish ourselves professionally. Our only challenge was the limited time we could spend together due to our demanding jobs. Travel became a constant, even for Maria. The sole point of contention was my mother living alone and desiring frequent visits. My wife harbored a dislike for her, and although I never probed the reasons, I endeavored to keep them apart, maintaining a delicate balance between them. In January, my mother became ill, and I informed my wife that I would care for her. She wasn't pleased, since I had just returned from covering a story in Iraq. We argued because she wanted me to hire help for my mother instead of going myself. I explained that my mother was old, and this might be the last time I see her alive. Maria was unhappy, but I ignored it. 3 days later, my mother died in my arms, leaving me devastated. After her burial, I returned home, and Maria once again complained about my mother. I was shocked and couldn't understand her point. She caused so much trouble, insisting that the deceased person should have been in the hospital from the start. I remained silent, trying to comprehend it all. Why is Maria criticizing a deceased person? I retorted, but she shut me down, saying, "The person won't respond, so I should zip it." That led to a week of silence between us. To break the ice, I took her out for dinner, and that night we shared a moment of closeness. Things seemed better, but I had to go to Afghanistan to cover the historic Silk Road. In my absence, Maria earned promotions and a higher salary. When I returned 2 weeks later, everything had changed. Coming home, Maria greeted me warmly, but during dinner she seemed tense. She said we needed changes in our lives. "What changes do you want?" I asked. She expressed the challenges of my frequent and prolonged absences, longing for my touch. Maria gave me 2 options: find a job near her, or find her a job to travel with me. Torn, but relieved by her honesty, I agreed to find another job, closing the topic. The next morning, I resigned and got a local job at the TV channel, even though it paid less. When I told Maria about the 30% reduction in my salary, she was angry. I explained the trade-off for a stationary job, but she resisted, upset about the decreased contribution and its impact on her lifestyle. It was a tough situation, but I was committed to making it work. We continued like that, and over the next 3 months, things deteriorated. We talked less, and nights lacked lovemaking. Her demeanor shifted from a loving wife to a nagging presence. She found faults in everything, and not a single day passed without going to bed angry. It got so bad that one night she asked me to stop breathing as my breath disturbed her sleep. A few days later, my phone went missing, prompting me to use my wife's phone to call mine. Surprisingly, her phone was locked, which was unusual since I never had a lock on mine and she never did either as far as I knew. This raised suspicions about why her phone had a lock. Was she hiding something? On a Thursday night, she returned from a late-night party with her office friends, appearing disheveled in a black dress with no lipstick. When I asked what happened, she explained she danced too much and was tired. Helping her to the bedroom, I noticed a bruise on her left thigh, and she wasn't wearing panties, which was out of character for her. Unable to sleep that night, I became determined to uncover the truth. As a journalist, my instinct was to investigate. Although I knew many people who could assist, I preferred handling it on my own. 3 weeks later, I found myself outside Motel 6 on Victory Drive at 2:30 p.m., having tracked Maria's car there. Approaching room 12, I unlocked the door and discovered a monitor displaying my wife in a compromising position with her blonde lover, Steve Bowman, an old college foe who had always admired Maria. My tears had ceased, leaving me emotionally numb. The pain in my heart was overwhelming. After 3 weeks of relentless investigation, breaking the door and acting impulsively crossed my mind. But I had promised the motel manager no violence, a condition for his assistance in setting up recording devices in the room. Despite the manager's restriction, violence remained an option. Outside the motel, I left with a smile, got into my car, and parked behind Steve's Mustang. Armed with an ice pick, I punctured all 4 tires, patiently waiting for what would unfold next. After an hour, Steve emerged, holding Maria by her exposed waist, an image I captured on camera. I returned my camera to its place and stepped out of my truck, approaching them directly. Maria remained silent, appearing as if she had seen a ghost, while Steve wore a sinister grin, reveling in taking another man's wife. Keeping his grip on her waist, I observed Maria's feeble attempt to free herself. Upon noticing me, she greeted me and questioned my unexpected presence. I stared back, not uttering a word. In an effort to explain, she insisted that she could clarify, emphasizing that it wasn't what I might be thinking. In response to her explanation, my retort came with my gaze fixed on Steve's hand on her waist, stating that I was not thinking, just observing. With a smile, I made a remark suggesting that Steve might have taken away my wife. Maria denied any wrongdoing, explaining that their interaction was part of a meeting they had at that location. My response was cynical, pointing out that the meeting seemed to involve unconventional activities. I asked if Steve had satisfied her, prompting a gasp from Maria as she recalled her recent words. A warning followed, stating that all her actions were on video and would be sent to her office, reaching friends, family, Linda, and her dad. Steve interjected, shouting a plea to leave Linda out of the situation. Dismissing his request, I added that Linda had every right to be involved, since her husband was involved with my wife, creating a lot of unfinished business. Maintaining a smile, I continued, mentioning that Linda had already witnessed their actions and was eagerly awaiting the video copy to file for divorce. I suggested that in their situation, preparing to say goodbye to their beloved Mustang might be wise, as it would be sold to settle the lawsuit. Furious, Steve lunged at me, a big mistake. Considering my years of travel to places like Iraq and Afghanistan, I had been among warriors and fighters, learning a few tricks along the way. Blocking his right hand, ducking forward, I landed a left on his chin, causing him to drop like a bag of potatoes. He struggled to get up, wobbling towards me, only to receive an uppercut that left him unconscious. Maria stood there, horrified, and I instructed her to get in the truck. We didn't go home. Instead, we headed straight to my lawyer. Ignoring Maria's inquiries, I gestured for her silence. In the lawyer's office, we were directed to the large conference room and took seats on opposite sides of the table. The atmosphere was tense until Ron Frey, my lawyer, entered and handed an envelope to Maria. He explained the terms, stating that the divorce had been filed based on irreconcilable differences. There was no shared property, and the legal transfer of my mother's house hadn't occurred, so she couldn't claim it. He informed her that she would receive half the money from the joint account, which she could withdraw. Since she earned more, there was no alimony. Ron concluded the discussion and left the room. Maria clutched the envelope and directed her gaze at me. Breaking the silence, I warned her that if she contested the divorce, I'd alter the grounds to infidelity, ensuring widespread exposure of her affair on all social media platforms. I threatened to send the evidence to her office, leading to her termination, and vowed to follow her if she fled to another city, making her life a perpetual fear of tarnished reputation. After she nodded in understanding, I stood up and left. Maria, however, spoke up, questioning if I wanted to know why she acted as she did. She explained that I desired a lifestyle she couldn't provide, seeking luxury without understanding the sacrifices. According to her, the blonde lover fulfilled those desires temporarily, but he was already married and merely seeking cheap entertainment. Maria questioned how long such happiness would last, anticipating a cycle of seeking new lovers. She concluded by pointing out my present situation, with only an envelope in hand. Her parting words wished me a nice day. Months later, I encountered her in court during the divorce proceedings. We never exchanged words, only receiving the court's orders granting the divorce. Steve, her lover, never filed a complaint against me, as cameras in the parking lot would have shown him as the aggressor. I sent Linda the videos and evidence of Steve's infidelity, leading to their divorce and rumors of Steve facing consequences from Linda's brothers. Linda's father, connected and vengeful, wanted to punish Maria, but Linda intervened. I changed jobs and eventually returned to my old position in a different city. Life moved forward, and at Istanbul Airport, I found myself a chief journalist with ample wealth, a faithful wife, and a wonderful daughter. Back in the airport lounge, my wife continued conversing with Maria for hours. Staying away, I observed their interaction, concerned about Maria's intentions. Later, I confirmed our departure time with airport officials. Boarding the flight after a challenging wait, I sat beside my wife, who displayed a different smile. Curious, I inquired about her discussion with Maria. She revealed she was expressing gratitude to Maria for her mistakes, which led her to find me. Surprised, I asked if Maria had disclosed this information. My wife clarified that Maria never mentioned me, but shared court orders and investigative materials found in the attic. When I asked about their conversation, my wife downplayed it, stating she listened to Maria's regrets about missing her ex-husband and her desire for a life like mine. I smiled, closed my eyes, and settled back into my chair.
Story 2.
Hope you have time and a snack, as this story is quite extensive, covering events from late 2019 to last week. Following the rules, all names are altered. Here's the backstory. My soon-to-be ex-wife was my high school sweetheart. We began dating in 1992 at the age of 17, and at 45, we're still together. She's the only woman I've ever been with, and we got married at 22, right after college. A year later, our first of 2 children, both boys, 22 and 17, came into our lives. I dedicated 23 years to her, building a house and working tirelessly to provide the life she wanted. Despite inevitable rough patches in any marriage, we always found a way to overcome challenges, making the discovery of her affair even more shocking. Let's go back to March 2020, when I first sensed something was off. For the preceding 2 months, we were in a funk. I was recovering from reconstructive knee surgery. I blew out my ACL in fall 2019, still limited in movement with only about 55% range of motion. This took a toll on various aspects of our life. On workers' comp, due to a job-related injury, I couldn't handle my usual household duties, resulting in a backlog. While my sons helped where they could, tasks only I could manage had to be postponed, or my wife had to step in, which displeased her. Things also came to a standstill in the bedroom between us. It had already slowed down before my injury, but in my then state, it completely stopped. During these months, she, let's call her Sue, spent more time hanging with co-workers after work. From November 2019 to March 2020, it was a regular occurrence. Naturally, I thought nothing of it, given the 23 trust-filled years we'd shared. Sue and I had our own friends, and we also had mutual ones. I used to hang out with my friends frequently without any issues. Everything was above board. Around January of this year, however, I noticed something odd. Sue started becoming noticeably distant. While we were in a funk, she had never denied me affection to that extent. The usual hugs and kisses came to a halt. Her phone, which was always in her hand, became a source of suspicion, as she was now guarded about it. Even her interactions with me became more snippy, as if she couldn't be bothered. Fast forward to March, COVID has arrived, and New York City is in lockdown. Our chosen careers are deemed essential, so we don't have to work from home. Having recently been cleared to return to work after 5 months, I was eager to get back into action. 5 months on my back, Rehabbing my knee and being unable to engage in physical activities had driven me nuts. For context, I enjoy physical activities. I'm an avid martial artist, typically hitting the gym 4 days a week, in addition to all the home projects I tackled. Within a week or two of the lockdown, my STBXW informs me that she'll have to start putting in extra hours. Once again, I think nothing of it due to her field. I assumed it would be every other day, but no, it was every day, and not just for an hour or two. She would come home 3 or more hours later, go straight to the shower, spend a little time with me, a little time with our 17-year-old, the 22-year-old lives with his GF crosstown, and then go to bed. As I become more adept at supporting myself on my knee, our copulation resumes. However, as you would probably guess, she wasn't mentally or emotionally present for it, a fact I noticed quickly. By early April, the situation became clearer to me. All signs pointed to the idea that she was having an affair. That's when I decided I needed to find answers. I scoured the internet for signs of infidelity, and she was pretty much ticking all the boxes on such behavior. My search then advanced to how I could find proof. I started with her social media, looking at her Facebook entries from months prior, which were pretty much the usual. They included pictures of us and our sons, pictures with her friends, and quite a few of her nights out with coworkers. In these pictures, there's a mixed bag of her closest friends from work, along with a couple of people I've never met from her workplace. But one recurring thing caught my eye in many of these pictures. One guy. In every photo he's in, he's uncomfortably close to her, with his arm around her shoulder or his hand on her lower back. Way too close for a guy I've never personally met. Needless to say, that put a sour taste in my mouth. But that wasn't the worst of it. No. The worst part was the fact that, apparently, this guy is a friend of hers on Facebook and follows her on Instagram. So I go to look up his Facebook account, and wouldn't you know it, I'm blocked. Why the heck am I blocked from seeing this guy's Facebook account, but he's friends with her on Facebook? Yep, now I'm in Batman detective mode. At that point, I wasn't even trying to deny it. I knew she was cheating on me with this guy. My mission was to find out for how long, and over the course of April and May, that's what I did. I never had any clue about the depth of info you could secure from phone, text, and email records until then. We have a family plan cell phone package, and I was able to pull up quite a bit of data. My soon-to-be ex-wife's data history was telling. The two most frequent numbers she had interacted with from October 2019 to April 2020 were my own, and a number I'd never seen before. Take a wild guess whose number it was? A quick check on Google confirmed it was the guy from the photos who blocked me on Facebook. We'll call him POS because that's what he is. Again, the picture becomes even clearer at this point. But a lot of their messages and texts were disjointed, indicating she was deleting a lot of them. I knew she was cheating on me with this guy, but nothing in the data could serve as a hot lead. I needed more evidence. It's at this point that I tell my best friend Oz what I had found. He asked me if I confronted her with what I had, and I said no because I felt like it wasn't enough. That's when he told me about an app that I could download to apparently spy on her communications in real time. I won't say the name as I don't know the rules on that here. I got it installed, synced up my data plan, and waited. Within days of doing so, I finally saw it, a text string between the two of them talking about how much fun they'd had the previous night and making plans to do it again that weekend. Boom. Gut punch. To say it was completely devastating was an understatement. I guess that moment counts as my D-Day, and for the next 2 days after, I was just broken. I actively distanced myself from her during those 2 days immediately after D-Day, which she noticed. She'd try to console me and ask me what was wrong, but I'd brush it off and leave her presence. I couldn't even look at her. This woman who I gave 23 years of my life to, who I have given everything to as a husband and more, stepped outside of our marriage for a guy just 5 years older than our eldest son. By the third day, I wasn't even sad anymore. I was furious. I informed Oz that my suspicion had been confirmed, and he inquired if I had confronted her. I replied in the negative, expressing my desire for payback beyond mere divorce. I aimed to thoroughly disrupt and ruin her life. Formulating a plan, I drew inspiration from a quote in my readings on infidelity, emphasizing unpredictability as the enemy. This principle became the foundation of my strategy, making her life challenging while secretly planning my exit. As we entered early June, the app remained installed, and each night I meticulously gathered data from their messages. Their exchanges portrayed a full-fledged relationship, including romantic texting, romantic expressions, and explicit content. Having stopped actively reviewing the content, I focused on collecting information and cataloging it on my private FPS server. Simultaneously, I began engaging in unconventional behavior, going out at odd times and returning home later than she did. In her presence, I increased my phone usage, responding to her inquiries about my activities with a nonchalant, "just stuff," before putting my phone away. I changed my login information, denying her access. Throughout our marriage, transparency was the norm, but around the presumed start of her affair, she altered her passwords on Facebook and her phone, citing recent security breaches as a cover for concealing the affair. Having briefed Oz on my plan and shared the situation with my older sister and two close friends, I entrusted them with secrecy. For context, Oz and I have been friends since childhood, and the other friends, Joey and Nina, we've known since high school. Nina becomes relevant later. Come July, my STBXW is in full paranoia mode, intensifying her texts and calls, questioning my whereabouts, and expressing concerns about my actions. The seed planted in her head the previous month is beginning to sprout, especially evident in her communication with POS. She confides in him about her doubts and confusion, accusing me of growing cold and distant. The audacity of this woman. Amidst these interactions with POS, she suggests they should avoid meeting at our house, confirming his presence in my home. Thanks, Sue. In a specific communication, POS asks if she's worried about me potentially cheating on her, infuriating her. Reading this exchange brings me immense joy and laughter. A cheating wife arguing with her affair partner about the possibility of her husband cheating on her. The irony is palpable. To clarify, I'm not involved with anyone else. When I leave, I usually spend time at Oz or Joey's, enjoying drinks, watching fights, and bonding with my friends. Alternatively, I might be at my big sis's house, hanging out with her and my BIL, who's like an older brother to me. My sis is 52 and her hubby is 58. She informed him about my STBXW's infidelity, but not about my plan, as he tends to be a bit of a blabbermouth. Fast forward to October, and things intensify. In my faux affair for 3 months, Sue is keenly aware of my active withdrawal. From the inception of my plan until October 20th, 2020, the day she confronted me, there was no physical contact between us. No hugs, kisses, or initiation of copulation. Nothing. Not that she needed it. She continued her involvement with POS, either at his place or motels. That afternoon, she calls me at work, an uncommon occurrence before all this began, and asks me to come straight home after work, claiming she has something important to tell me. I won't deceive you all. I was halfway expecting her to confess to her infidelity, but of course, she didn't. Instead, I arrive home to find her questioning whether I'm unhappy with her. The nerve! She points out that I've been spending too much time away, lacking affection, and our bed life is withered. She suggests I might be pushing her away due to resentment over her treatment during my knee rehab months. Then, the punchline. She asks if I'm cheating on her. Folks, I collapsed on the floor, laughing uncontrollably, like Joker laughing gas hysterical. While it may have seemed like I was dismissively laughing off the idea of infidelity to her, I was actually laughing at the sheer irony unfolding before me. In fits of laughter for a good 2 minutes, I compose myself enough to respond. I sit up, meet her eyes for the first time in months, shake my head without giving an answer, stand up, brush myself off, kiss the top of her head, and proceed to settle in for the night. Later that night, in my office, I decide to check what she's been telling him, given the brevity of the incident. I fire up the app, and they're indeed texting in real time. She informs POS that she believes he is cheating on her. She mentioned confronting him tonight, describing his reaction as laughter. She feels he doesn't care about her feelings anymore and is convinced that he's gone. She sees it as karma and acknowledges that she has lost him. The smile on my face reading that must have resembled the Cheshire Cat. She was breaking. POS tried to console her, stating that if I cared enough, she wouldn't have had to seek comfort from him. However, the tone of her responses indicated doubt. She had the audacity to step out of our marriage during my legitimate injury, keeping the affair going for nearly a year. Yet, the thought of losing me to another woman made her waver? What a weakling. Simultaneously, I executed the second part of my revenge plan, organizing my financial affairs. In September, I consulted with a family attorney to initiate divorce proceedings, armed with the substantial evidence I had gathered. New York being an at-fault state for divorce, the overwhelming proof of Sue's infidelity pretty much ensured I could nail her in a divorce case. My attorney advised me to organize all my financial documents in anticipation of potential asset division. Going a step further, I covertly withdrew all my funds from our joint account and transferred them to my personal account. Additionally, I initiated the search for an apartment as part of Phase 2. Fast forward to November, and my behavior remains consistent. In fact, I've escalated it. This is where my friend Nina becomes significant. For context, Nina and Sue have never been what one would call close. I met Nina 2 years before Sue during my freshman year of high school. From the beginning, Sue viewed Nina as a threat, since she's my closest female friend. Although Sue has never explicitly addressed it, her mistrust of Nina is evident to anyone paying attention. Conversely, Nina has never been a fan of Sue. Early in my relationship with Sue, Nina pointed out how Sue was intruding into our friend circle, while I didn't do the same with Sue's set of friends. This bothered Nina because she understood why Sue was doing it. Jealousy. Even now, among Sue's circle, there are no male friends except POS, while Nina is the only female in my friend group. Nina, who had been overseas due to the virus, returned to NYC on November 3rd. To celebrate her return, Oz, Joey, and I planned a small gathering at Joey's house, with dinner and drinks, sticking to CDC guidelines. Nina, the mastermind, proposed an idea to trigger Sue by taking photos similar to those I discovered of Sue and POS months earlier and posting them on my Facebook. And that's exactly what we did. Sue got wind of it on the 5th, as some friends noticed my updates and observed how uncomfortably close I appeared with Nina. This thoroughly confused her, because she still believed I was cheating. Although she likely wanted to accuse Nina, she knew Nina had been stuck in Europe for most of the year. Nevertheless, that didn't stop her from attempting to criticize me that night for being handsy in the photos. I saw this as a perfect opportunity to deliver the lead jab for my knockout blow. I mentioned the pictures with her and POS from last year, noting that he was pretty handsy in them. I pointed out that I didn't get bent out of shape over it. Deer in headlights. It was the first time I had even mentioned the guy's name throughout all of this. The gears in her head started spinning in real time as she tried to explain away those pictures. Up to that point, she hadn't known I had seen them, given how infrequently I use Facebook. When I do post something, it becomes an event, which is why the pictures with Nina specifically gained so much attention among our circles. And explain away she did, stating that he's that way with everyone. He's just a really friendly guy, and she can see how it looks, but there's nothing there. She apologized if those photos caused me distress and offered to delete them. However, the pictures aren't what hurt me. What hurt me was the fact that she had been involved with the guy while deceiving me, claiming to be working extra hours and spending time with friends. As Lieutenant Com Worf from Star Trek, TNG famously said, "Vengeance is a dish best served cold." From that night on, Sue was being unusually clingy and attentive to me, like, annoyingly so. She attempted to initiate affection and copulation, but I stonewalled her at every opportunity. Meanwhile, I continued archiving everything she shared with POS. By this point, I had long since gone numb. Any desire I might have had to save my marriage was dead. I had checked out the day I initiated the first phase of my plan. She confided in him that I had become worse, expressing uncertainty and feeling like I hated her, which I do. Then comes the bombshell. She couldn't see him anymore. The guilt was overwhelming, and she felt like karma was suffocating her. She couldn't risk losing me. Despite loving POS deeply, she claimed to be still in love with me, emphasizing the need to save our marriage before losing me. No, my dear, you're about 8 months too late for that. POS lost his composure, proclaiming his love for her and insisting she was making a mistake. That text chain would be their last until about 3 weeks ago. Throughout the remainder of November into December, Sue remained in limbo, trying to gauge my headspace and uncertain if I was actually being unfaithful. Meanwhile, POS bombarded her phone daily, but she didn't respond. I observed her checking her phone often, then quickly putting it away. Meanwhile, phase 2 of the plan was now officially complete. The divorce papers were done. I found a studio apartment in Co-op City, signed a 2-year lease, and all my money was in my personal account. I was ready to throw my haymaker. Now we're at Thanksgiving. My oldest and his girlfriend hosted a small gathering with our immediate families. It was my oldest, his girlfriend, her parents, myself, Sue, and our youngest. We had a great night, and my oldest girlfriend, who's studying to be a chef, did all the cooking herself. As I had to maintain the appearance of nothing being wrong between Sue and me, I initiated affection with her several times that evening. Kisses on the cheek, cute hugs, and wrapping my arms around her shoulders from behind. These gestures didn't go unnoticed by her, and she reveled in them. Keep in mind, this was the first time I touched this woman since I kissed the top of her head the night she confronted me in October, about 2 months. I won't lie, I felt repulsed doing it, but I had to. I couldn't risk the plan, and being distant in front of my boys, my oldest girlfriend and her parents would raise alarms. So, my youngest decided to stay overnight with his big brother, and Sue and I headed home. On the drive home, she thanked me for being good to her and said, "I don't know what you're going through, baby, but I'm here for you." I had to hold off on bursting into maniacal laughter again and responded, "I know, I just need time." So for the first time realistically since springtime, we had closeness that night. I thought, why not? With what I'm about to do, might as well get some action before I erase her from my existence. I won't go into detail, but it wasn't lovemaking. When I finished, she was a lump of flesh trying to figure out the direction of the truck that ran her over. No cuddling or anything after. I just got up, showered, and went to sleep in my office. To her confusion, though, I used a contraceptive the first time in 2 decades. She was definitely perplexed by it, but she didn't ask questions. I sure as hell wasn't going raw with her, knowing that she'd been doing so with POS for months at that point. I woke up the next day and checked my handy-dandy spy app, and for the first time in weeks, she responded to POS. The dude went full novella, professing his love for her, claiming she was wasting her time trying to reignite a flame in me that had died. She claimed she had been in a prison with me for 23 years and deserved the love and affection of a man who would cherish her. Keep in mind, this guy is 27 years old, 5 years older than our oldest son, and he's infatuated with a 45-year-old married mother of 2. What a top-notch, high-quality simp. She opted to destroy our marriage and dismantle the home we had built for this guy? A pretty boy with a soft side? Ha! In response, she reiterated essentially the same sentiments from their previous conversation. She loves him, enjoyed their time together, but she can't risk losing me. I'm still the love of her life, but she'll always have a place for him in her heart. They can remain friends if he chooses, but the physical relationship between them is over. He pleaded with her to see him one last time that week, and yes, she agreed. One more for the road, right? Who am I to say anything? That's what I did to her the previous night. I, of course, added all of that to the archive I had compiled. December 4th marked the beginning of Phase 3, the final stage of Operation Shinobi Ghost. The divorce papers were in hand. My new place of residence was set up, and now I had to gradually start moving my stuff out of the house. But first, I had to break the news to my boys. I called my oldest to the house that Friday night, had them join me in my office, and laid everything on the table. Not the specifics, but that their mother had been cheating on me for over a year, and I would be filing for divorce soon. My 17-year-old was especially shaken up because he had recently experienced his first taste of infidelity. His first girlfriend had cheated on him just 4 months prior. Witnessing his heart broken a second time at the idea that his own mother was capable of this hit him hard. My oldest took it a lot better and suggested taking his brother to live with him until this blows over, to which I agreed. We packed up some of his stuff, and he asked me if I was going to be okay. I assured him that I would be all right, and so would he. I promised that we were going to be all right. And then, they were off. The hardest part was now over, and it was time to arm the nukes. Over the next few weeks, day by day, Oz would help me get some of my most sensitive stuff out of the house. I provided him with a list of all the definite items to grab while Sue and I were at work and left him the spare key. These were things Sue wouldn't notice were missing unless you told her they were gone. I also got a new phone and phone number, informing everyone who needed to know, Oz, Joey, Nina, my boys, Big Sis, and my mother, of my new contact info. Meanwhile, I kept up the ruse with Sue, and she was none the wiser. I trickled bits and pieces of affection to her just to keep her off the trail, while she was still in contact with POS. Not to the extent they were before, but there was still an emotional connection. The fog was faint, but it was still there. All the while I gathered everything, and I mean everything. Every bit of data I had archived since I started the plan. Call logs, texts, pics, emails, everything. I began making printouts. I must have spent over $1,500 on Staples supplies. Printer ink, paper, binders, the works. I cataloged everything in order, from the beginning of the affair until that last bit 2 weeks ago, December 16th, in the binders. 14 of them. I boxed each one, gift wrapping and addressing them to various recipients. My mother, my father passed away 7 years ago, her parents, her 2 sisters, her brother, her HR department. I forgot to mention POS works for the same company, and there's a rule against intercompany relationships due to the nature of her job. Several friends, POS, and POS's parents. I carried all those packages to the post office and shipped them on December 16th with an estimated delivery between December 22nd and 24th. Perfect. Now we're at Christmas Eve. Sue arrived home around the usual time, unaware if she had seen POS, as I stopped tracking her on the app on the 18th. Assuming I had gathered all the information needed, she showered, spent some time with me, and I concluded the night in the living room. Yes, I know, I'm not the nicest person. The final phase was upon me at last. The nuke I had been arming since June was about to be launched. In the middle of the night, I woke up, wrapped one of the 3 remaining binders with the divorce papers taped to the inside cover, and left it on my side of the bed with a note that said, "Merry Christmas." Next to it, I left my old phone and my lawyer's business card. I packed up the rest of my essential items, enough to fill 2 backpacks, and left my home, where I had spent 23 years, for the last time. That, my friends, was 1 week ago. To Sue, I am completely off the grid, gone, shadow ghosted. She's blocked on FB, but for some reason, she hasn't blocked me, so I'm keeping tabs on the fallout. It's absolutely glorious. My packages have reached everyone I sent them to, and Sue is facing severe backlash. Her youngest sister completely reprimanded her. Both of her parents condemned her. My mom tore into her mercilessly. I know my mom has a mean streak, but the things she called Sue were unfathomable. Sue is desperately trying to find out if anyone knows where I am, but those who do aren't saying a word. On her FB feed, she's desperately trying to reach me, likely knowing I'm likely looking, but I'm not saying a word to her without my lawyer present. That'll be the next time I share oxygen with her. She has no way of spinning the narrative to paint me as the bad guy because I've exposed her to everyone who matters to her. According to a mutual friend working in the same company as her, she and POS are apparently being put on administrative leave as of tomorrow. So yeah, chances are she'll be going into 2021 unemployed. As for the final 2 binders, one has been turned over to my lawyer as my final piece of evidence for my impending divorce, and the last one I placed in my storage unit to be burned in Joey's fire pit when the divorce is final. Do I feel guilty about this? No, not even in the slightest. For 23 years I did right by this woman. I gave her the home she wanted, the family she wanted, the life I felt we both deserved, and I loved her unconditionally. Never did I falter. Never did I stray. Never did I even entertain the notion of breaking my vows. When an issue came up that I felt was affecting our marriage, I came to her and told her, and we sorted it out as best we could. Instead of coming to me and expressing her unhappiness with our bed life at the time, she decided to seek comfort in another man's bed. So no, I have no sympathy for what I did or for her. She can burn in hell for all I care. The most I stand to lose is my house, a car, and maybe a couple of $100 a month in alimony. Still, considering the divorce is filed under the statute of infidelity and NYS is at fault, that might get waived with the insurmountable amount of evidence I've provided. As far as I'm concerned, she's dead to me, and I'm never looking back. Initially, after discovering her infidelity, I pondered how to salvage the situation. However, Witnessing the audacity of their interactions and subsequent communications fueled my anger. What started as regret and sadness quickly transformed into fury. When I confided in my friend Oz, I had already decided to take a scorched earth approach. Unexpectedly, I continued this approach longer than I anticipated. I could have confronted her 4 to 5 months before Christmas, but I confess that I derived pleasure from making her suffer. It turned into a game, and the prize was watching her squirm. While this may make me seem somewhat sadistic, she destroyed our marriage, and I was determined to dismantle her relationships with everyone we know. Despite not being inherently evil or vindictive, I firmly believe in treating others fairly and adhering to the golden rule. However, I cannot tolerate disrespect. My STBXW is a fragile, superficial, self-entitled individual who prioritized her desires over our marriage. She will receive no forgiveness or mercy from me. The upcoming months will be challenging as my divorce unfolds, marked by hurtful words and spiteful actions. Nevertheless, I will remain steadfast in my mission to ruin her, offering no pity or leniency, just as she showed me none when she broke her vows. This battle is far from over, but my determination surpasses hers. I am determined to break her and leave her with nothing, feeling no remorse in doing so. Update. Christmas Day marked the first full day I spent in my new apartment, a work in progress where I plan to reside for at least 2 years. Although I still need to acquire more items, I have overall transformed it into my home. My sons, along with the eldest girlfriend, spent a significant part of the day with me. The girlfriend brought treats and prepared a delightful meal. It provided an opportunity to engage in meaningful conversations with my sons, a connection I hadn't experienced in a long time. My older sister also visited, bringing more goodies and spending time with us, marking the first time she had seen her nephews in nearly a year. Their presence had a positive impact on me. Otherwise, I might have resorted to excessive drinking if alone. Everyone left around 8-ish, prompting me to decide to hang out with Joey and his wife Claudia. We spent a couple of hours together, had a couple of drinks, and then I returned home. The next significant development occurred on December 29th, 2020. Around midday, I received a text from Nina asking if I was busy that night. Since I wasn't, we agreed to meet after I finished work. We went to a nearby diner for indoor dining at 25% capacity. Nina openly shared her feelings, confessing that she has liked me since our teenage years, but never had the chance to express it due to Sue entering the picture. I've known Nina longer than Sue by 2 years, and she has been a part of my social circle with Oz and Joey. In high school, we were the social outcasts, the raver kids who didn't fit into conventional cliques. Back then, Nina faced challenges with weight and diabetes, but we always had chemistry. Nowadays, Nina is a personal trainer and yoga instructor, having transformed into a beautiful swan. In short, we decided that upon the finalization of my divorce, we will start seeing each other. Yes, we slept together that night, and I feel no shame. Nina has been a better friend to me than Sue ever was. That's not to say Sue wasn't my best friend, but over the near quarter century I've known Nina, she has consistently supported me, even stepping back from her own feelings to allow me to pursue a life with Sue. This selflessness resonated with me in ways I didn't anticipate. Despite sounding like I'm justifying the decision in my head, to me, it was the right choice, and I plan on exploring what the future holds with Nina with total commitment. Now, on to yesterday, the day I met my wife and her lawyer to discuss the divorce. It has been 2 weeks since I ceased communication with my soon-to-be ex-wife, STBXW. This Monday, I received a call from my lawyer informing me that Sue's attorney scheduled a meeting to discuss divorce terms on January 6, 21, yesterday. I met with him on Tuesday to outline my desired terms, an uncontested divorce, citing marital neglect from Sue. In summary, I propose a complete division of assets, selling my half of the house to her and keeping our respective vehicles. I retain ownership of my cabin in the Poconos, and under the grounds of marital neglect, she will not receive spousal support from me. Regarding my son, whom I'll refer to as 17, he is free to choose his residence post-divorce, likely with me. On Wednesday, I dressed in my Johnny Cash best and attended a meeting at my lawyer's office with my wife and her lawyer. She appeared disheveled and barely held it together. Without delving into legal jargon, her lawyer presented terms for reconciliation, which I promptly rejected. We agreed to a legal separation leading to an uncontested divorce. The only revision is that I will provide $653 per month in temporary spousal support to cover utilities until she gains employment. She got fired for inappropriate behavior. This support will last up to a year post-finalization. Financially, it won't significantly impact me even if she takes time finding a new job. After a full calendar year post-divorce finalization, she is on her own. It's a small price to pay for freedom. If all goes smoothly, I'll be free of her by early April, approximately 3 months from now. Post-meeting, my lawyer provided final words and promised to keep me updated on the filing progress. Outside, Sue approached me, asking if we could talk. I agreed. While she held it together during the meeting, she broke down outside, expressing remorse and stating she never intended for things to go as far as they did. She admitted to falling in love with someone else, but acknowledged the wrongdoing in betraying her husband. She asked for forgiveness and proposed the idea of starting anew in a few years. I informed her that this would be our last conversation. I reminded her that our son is almost an adult, capable of making his own choices. I conveyed that I had given half of my life and unconditional love, only for her to confess love to someone else. I expressed the impossibility of forgiving her, stating that I loved who she once was, but despised who stood before me. I made it clear that seeing her again would be too soon. Here we are on the sidewalk in Midtown Manhattan, with her causing a scene, crying her eyes out. A couple of people walked by, giving side glances, but at that point, I didn't care. I wasn't about to publicly offend her. I had already socially and professionally destroyed her. However, I needed to release the last bit of emotion I had for her. I finished by telling her that I didn't regret the 23 years I spent as her husband. My regret was that, in those 23 years, she chose the easy way out, and I thought she was mine when, in reality, it was just my turn. Putting in my Raycons, I turned around and walked away. Later that night, her father called and apologized. He commended me for always being a good man to his daughter and expressed his disappointment in her actions. I'll miss the old man. He's been my default father figure since my dad passed away years ago. However, I can't see myself maintaining a relationship with anyone on her side of the family. After that call, I went on Facebook and symbolically changed my relationship status to divorced. It's not final yet, but in my eyes, it's over. When I make a post on Facebook, it's an event, so plenty of people started reaching out over Messenger, asking questions. I laid it all out, stating that I filed for divorce with Sue earlier in the day. Nina called, shocked at how fast I pulled the trigger. I asked her to come over, and she did. We spent the night together, talking into the wee hours of the morning. I haven't felt this level of relief and connection in a really long time. Nina gets me, and I can't get enough of being around her. Since the day she confided in me, she's all that's been on my mind. Some might say it's messed up that I'm moving on so fast, but as far as I'm concerned, my marriage ended the day POS let Sue touch him, so I'm about due. So, that's it. My divorce is in the works, and I'm moving on to start a relationship with Nina. We'll take it slow, and we won't announce anything until the divorce with Sue is legal and official. As for Sue, I couldn't care less about what happens to her. She could move in with POS into our old home for all I care. I'll be getting my money for the house over 2021, 4 quarterly installments, and apart from the $653 I'll pay her monthly, I never have to see or speak to her again. Since only my closest friends, 2 sons, older sister, and mother have my new contact info, and I've completely blocked my soon-to-be ex-wife, STBXW, on all social outlets, she has had no means of reaching me since I left her on Christmas Eve. Still, some of our mutual friends do. Last night, I'm in my apartment, and I receive a voice call notification on Messenger from one of these friends, one of the few who hadn't abandoned her following my outing of her affair. She didn't waste any time when I answered, saying she had checked on Sue, the STBXW, and found her passed out in the bedroom, foaming at the mouth with 2 bottles of empty pills next to her. She's in the ICU in critical but stable condition. The doctor said she will likely pull through, but she won't be well after. She begged and pleaded for me to come. Her parents and 2 of her sisters were also at the hospital. My guess is they were notified after the hospital attempted to reach me, but Sue would still have my old number as her emergency contact. I simply told her no. Sue's not my problem anymore, and she decided to take the easy way out rather than deal with the shame and agony of the 23-year marriage she blew up. I then told her friend that if Sue's family was there, they could help her sort out the pieces. But as far as Sue and I are concerned, there is no Sue and I anymore. I then ended the call. I've had a few hours to reflect on it, and my sons called me this morning to ask if I knew. I affirmed that I did, but also made it clear to both of them that if they want to be there and supportive of their mother, I won't hold it against them or judge them. After all, she is their mother. However, I personally wash my hands of her and care little to nothing about what she does to or for herself anymore. They were taken aback by this, but they respected my stance. Now that the news has broken about her self-destruction attempt, many friends who had distanced themselves from her are resurfacing, urging me to support her in her time of need, despite what she did to me. I've been informed that her affair partner tried to visit her this morning, but wasn't allowed because he's not family. I'm being pressured to go see her, but I feel nothing for this woman anymore. I haven't for a very long time. I checked out during the process of getting my payback for her betrayal, and I stand by the fact that I don't care at all for what she's done. In fact, it makes me hate her even more. She's the one who was unfaithful, who thought a near year-long fling with a guy 5 years older than her oldest son was worth destroying 23 years. Even now, facing the consequences of her choices, she chooses the most selfish way of dealing with it. Now that she's likely to survive, she's garnered immediate sympathy from everyone who took her to task, and I'm being portrayed as the jaded ex-husband, unwilling to sympathize by most of her family, except her dad, who reached out and said he respects my decision to stay away. It's like I never truly knew this woman in 23 years, and it has come to this. I understand that the way I broke things off may have put her in a poor mental state, but a whole new set of issues has arisen. Either she had a complete breakdown and decided to damage herself, or she made a risky, calculated move to gain favor back from those who condemned her weeks ago for betraying me. I want to be perfectly clear. I am not going to visit Sue. She waived her right to my care when she let her lover put himself inside her. I may come off as heartless, but despite my calm demeanor, my feelings are still very raw. I don't care about this woman and haven't for a long time. If you were in my shoes, you'd see her actions differently, maybe tormenting her for months, fooling her into thinking I was cheating on her while she cheated on me, and destroying her socially and professionally led to her meltdown. Maybe I am a heartless sociopath, but as Arthur Fleck said, you get what you deserve. I gave this woman half of my life and did everything to be the best husband she could ever have. By her own admission, I had no bearing on her decision to betray our marriage. She did it for her, and her selfishness knows no bounds. I'm glad to be rid of her. If it makes me the bad guy because I won't see her and never plan on interacting with her again, so be it. I hold true to my convictions. She made the choice to betray me, to put her needs above the needs of our marriage, so now it's my turn to choose me over everything else. She can rot in the darkest pit of hell for all I care. Let everyone else help her fix herself. My obligation to care about her well-being ended the day we signed the separation agreement. I just needed to get this off my chest. If you're going to cast judgment on me for feeling this way, save it. After 23 years and 2 children, I never really knew this woman, and I have no sympathy for her, nor will I ever. Let her rot. I've been informed by Sue's dad that she's been moved from the ICU to the mental health wing. Doctors are still monitoring her mental state. She's conscious and cognitive again, but obviously lethargic. Her father told me she asked if I came to see her, and he said no, after which she shut down. He respectfully said any further news he'll share only if I inquire, understanding the headspace I'm in. Also, I've scheduled counseling for 17, with the first consultation this coming Monday. Today, against everything I previously stated, I decided to visit Sue. She's been out of the hospital for 4 days now, and surprisingly, it was Nina who convinced me that seeing her in her weakened state might help me let go of the contempt I feel for her. Around 6 p.m., I called her for the first time since I served her. Her hello lacked the brightness I'd known for over 2 decades. Her voice was hoarse and weak. The moment she heard my voice, she began crying, taking almost 3 minutes to regain composure enough to talk again. Before she could say anything, I informed her that I was coming to see her by 8 p.m., and she agreed. It's about an hour and a half from Co-op City, where my new apartment is, to my old home. I grabbed a bite to eat from the local pizzeria and started on my way there. I arrived around 7:47 p.m., and she was already at the door before I pulled into the driveway. As I approached, I could see the toll her actions had taken on her, noticeably thinner, an unhealthy kind of thin. As a whole, she looked like the walking dead. The first thing she tried was to come in for a hug, and I stopped her cold. She got the hint that I wasn't there to console her and backed off immediately. We went inside and sat in the living room. Almost immediately, Sue told me she wanted to come clean about everything. She explained that she couldn't live with the guilt of what she did to me and the boys. Since the day we signed the separation agreement, she went into a downward spiral of guilt and agony that led to her self-destruction attempt. Her friend, the one who called me from the hospital, had noticed her behavior and started coming over to check on her. She said the doctors told her that if she hadn't been found just an hour earlier, she would have succeeded. Sue admitted to failing me as a wife. Falling for POS was wrong, as was her choice not to pull back when she knew she was getting too deep. She also apologized for sharing many lovemaking details of our marriage and speaking ill of me to him. She never imagined herself being capable of doing that, but she was. She believed in her head that she was doing the right thing, but when she thought I was cheating, it hit her like a ton of bricks. The feeling of betrayal was suffocating, and she had to get out as soon as possible, but it was obviously too late by then. She then asked me at what point did I stop caring, to which I replied that the night she confronted me with the notion of me cheating, with the knowledge that she had been with POS for months at that point, I lost all respect for her, and it solidified my resolve to enact my plan. She told me that when she woke up on Christmas morning and found the gift I left, she was over the moon until she opened it. When she realized what it was and how much I had known, she literally went mad and hasn't set foot in our bedroom since. She was frantically trying to find out if anyone knew where I was, but when she went on Facebook to ask, she started getting thrashed by friends and family about what she had done, with no idea how everyone knew so fast. That's when I told her about the other binders. The look of shock on her face was priceless. It all dawned on her that I did this to her. Everything she's gone through, her friends turning on her, her family shaming her, and even her losing her job, was my doing. She fell silent and shut down after that. I took the time to use the bathroom, and it was in shambles. The mirror was broken, her skincare products were scattered, and the tub looked like it hadn't been cleaned since they took her to the hospital. When I came back to the living room, she had her face in her hands, weeping, and I can honestly say I felt nothing. No more anger, no more rage, and absolutely not a shred of pity. They say the opposite of love is indifference. Looking at her, that's all I felt. She gazes up at me, uttering, "I messed everything up. I ruined us, and I have no idea what to do. I can't do this by myself." I remind her she has her family, the friend who found her, and our sons, but not me. She never will, ever again. I explain that I came to offer closure from the ordeal she just put herself through, but the moment I exit that door, I won't be looking back. The topic of POS arises shortly after. She discloses that he contacted her 2 days ago. They talked for a couple of hours, and it concluded with her advising him to move on with his life, find someone younger, and forget she exists. The rest of the conversation involves Sue apologizing for betraying me and questioning if this is truly the end. I look her directly in the eyes without hesitation and affirm that yes, it's been over long before I served the divorce notice on Christmas. Sensing it was time to leave, no more words were exchanged. I departed, leaving her on the couch. I closed the door behind me, got into my car, and drove home. I needed to express this while it's fresh in my head. The saga of Sue is over. 17 and I are both scheduled for counseling in the coming weeks. Nina and I are still going strong, adhering to the plan of keeping things under wraps until my divorce is final. I'm staying active, motivated, and looking forward to a future with a woman I know will cherish and honor me, as she has done from the shadows for decades. It's time for me to focus on the life ahead of me. Update. Anyway, it's been just over 2 months since I served my wife divorce papers, and it's been a month since my last update. Many people have expressed concern about 17, my youngest son. Just days after my last update, he began individual counseling. I see. I accompanied him for his first 2 sessions, and he has been going on his own for every session since. He attends twice a week, and it has significantly helped. Overall, he's doing fine, but I can see that his trust in relationships has been completely shattered. The lasting effects of his own experience with infidelity, coupled with dealing with his mother's actions of cheating and her attempted ending, have left a significant scar that I believe may take decades to heal. I discovered that his experience was even worse than he let on. He actually caught his ex-girlfriend making out with a guy he thought was a friend, but it turned out the guy was only getting close to him to get to her. He never told me this aspect of his breakup. My heart breaks for my son to have had to experience this at such a pivotal point in his formative years. You do all you can to protect your children, but then life goes ahead and says no. He has decided to stick to IC for the long term, and I have assured him that he can talk to me about anything without any boundaries. Next up is my individual counseling, IC. If you've listened most of my entries, you know I have a bit of an anger problem. It's strange because I've always been a reserved, controlled, and stoic man. However, this whole experience evidently awakened a sleeping dragon in me that's a pure fire breather. I've discussed everything with my therapist, and when I say everything, I mean everything. When I explained the extent of what I did to my ex, he was both impressed and appalled, which wasn't the reaction I was expecting. Apparently, I display sociopathic tendencies when provoked, which doesn't surprise me given everything I did. My sessions are not so much dramatic. They're more organizational, unpacking all of the things going on in my head regarding the implosion of my marriage and trying to find balance. Now for the elephant in the room, Nina. I have no idea where I'd be without this woman. I never expected to have such a caring, empathetic, nurturing woman by my side to carry me through all of this. We are still going strong, and despite our attempts to keep our ongoing relationship under wraps, it's pretty much out in our group. She just gets me. She always has since we were teens, and since she knows the pain of having the person you've invested your life into cheat on you as well, she does all she can to help me cope with my feelings. We split time between staying at her place and my own. The discussion has come up about moving in with each other, but her 5-year-old puts a kibosh on that idea. My place isn't big enough for 3 people, and I'm locked into my lease until 2022, so for now, we'll keep splitting time between. When her daughter is away with her father, Nina's at my place. When she has her daughter, I'm at hers. Speaking of her daughter, I absolutely adore her, and she's taken a shine to me. I wish I could find the words to truly put into perspective how important Nina has been to me through all of this. If you haven't taken the time to listen my previous entries, Nina has secretly been in love with me since we were sophomores in high school. But she was an ugly duckling back then who thought she had no chance with me. She actively sat by and watched me chase after, date, and marry my soon-to-be ex-wife, Sue, knowing how she felt. For well over 25 years, she held this secret until a week after I had my divorce hearing, where we met for food, and she laid everything on the table. I consider myself lucky to have her in my life. We constantly talk about what the future holds between us. As we've both been burned by marriage, we're definitely not going that route, but we have discussed a civil union. We'll probably wait a little while before going that route, but it's pretty much decided between the two of us that we are it for each other. Last but not least, the soon-to-be ex-wife, Sue. What I want to share with everyone about her is, well, there's nothing to share. Since the final time I spoke to her after her attempted ending, I've implemented a 100% no-contact policy. I have no knowledge of her current situation or activities, and I have no desire to find out. In my perspective, she's no longer a part of my life. That pretty much covers it. Life moves forward. It's March 2nd as I type this, so there's only 1 more month until the completion of the filing process. By this time next month, I'll officially be a free man, and I'm eagerly counting down the days until I can genuinely embark on the next chapter of my life. To clarify a point, I made an error in my statement regarding being clinically diagnosed as a sociopath. I assumed that because my therapist mentioned I display sociopathic tendencies when provoked, it was a clinical diagnosis. It wasn't. It was simply his professional observation. Additionally, my oldest son, who is 22, doesn't genuinely intend to cause damage to POS. His remarks were made in the heat of anger. Update. On April 13th, just 1 month ago, Sue officially became my ex-wife. Initially, my lawyer informed me that it would be finalized on the 18th, but due in part to the reopening of things in NYC with the decrease in COVID cases, it was pushed through a few days earlier. Jeff, my lawyer, called me on April 12th and requested that I visit him the following day. When I did, he handed me the finalization notice and shook my hand. I couldn't just leave it at that, so I went in and gave him a hug, expressing gratitude for all he'd done for me. On my way home, all I could do was replay mental movies of everything, the last 24 years of my life, memories, and history. When I stepped into my apartment, it finally happened. I fall on the floor, and all the compressed emotion came pouring out. I haven't cried like that in ages, but it wasn't a sad cry. Not by any means. My soul felt liberated after being held in the deepest, darkest abyss. That night, I made a phone call to my 22. I kept it short, saying that it's finalized, and his mother and I are no longer married as of that day. He asked how I felt. I'm sure he could tell in my voice I'd been crying, and I told him I was fine. Next, 17 got on the phone, and we spoke for nearly 90 minutes. 22 and his fiancée have been looking after him well, and he, like myself, is still going to therapy. I won't go into detail about our conversation, but I will say there's still a lot of work to be done, especially regarding his view of relationships. Later that night, Nina came to see me, as she always does, and I shared the news. She wrapped her arms around my waist and held tight as, yes, I cried again. Once I composed myself, Nina assured me that no matter what, she would never betray me and loves me with all her heart. Every word of it is true. While I don't regret the life I built with Sue and appreciate the 2 strong sons she gave me, it's clear to me now that I picked the wrong woman. In the last 4.5 months, Nina has given so much without asking for anything in return. All she asks is for me to be there for her. I won't dwell on her for too long, but she truly is my hero. Following the divorce finalization, some other interesting events occurred. Notably, POS reached out to me. Yes, he actually sent me a message. I believe he's suffered enough. His first action was to apologize for his role in all of this. He explained the consequences of the binder I sent to his mother. Essentially, he's been excommunicated from his family. His devout Catholic mother, who attends church 3 days a week, was enraged to learn that her son had broken up a marriage that lasted almost a quarter century. She kicked him out that very day, and within a week, his employer, after receiving the binder, fired him as well. He's been couch hopping and searching for a new job ever since. He mentioned that he wanted to reach out to me on social media. You know, all the places he blocked me when avoiding Sue. But he admitted he was afraid because, in his words, if I was able to find him before, I could find him again. I confess I could have gone all in on destroying this guy, but I refrained. I inquired about the last time he saw Sue, and he admitted it had been months. The last time he spoke to her, Sue advised him to forget about her and move on with his life, consistent with what Sue told me. I asked a few more questions, and surprisingly, the guy was forthcoming, perhaps seeking penance for the chaos he caused. Much of what he said aligned with information from the text documentation I gathered. I didn't respond much. I asked, and he answered. The conversation lasted about 20 minutes before he reiterated his apology. That's when I delivered this message. You're a 27-year-old man who has to live the rest of your life knowing that your own mother now loathes you for breaking up a marriage almost as long as you've been breathing. I know you've messaged me because karma is eating at you, but I won't give you closure. When I was 27, I was building a legacy. Right now, you're a homeless, jobless homewrecker. If you're smart, you'll learn from this lesson. If not, you'll stay a duck up until you're my age, assuming you make it that far. I'd wish you luck, but you don't need luck. You need to get your crap in order. With that, I ended the conversation and blocked him. It may not be the closure he sought, and I could have been more hostile, but I believe those words will haunt him enough. The next significant event is that as of May 4th, 2021, Nina is now my wife. Over the last 2 months, we've had lengthy discussions about our future. Nina made it clear that she has no intentions of being with anyone else and desires to be my wife, urging me to adopt her daughter, Anna, as my own. Anna, who just turned 6, idolizes me. and I'm the first father figure she's had since her biological father left when she was 4. Nina has been cautious about introducing any man into Anna's life unless they had staying power, and I, with experience raising children, fit the bill. Anna and my 17 have developed a close bond, resembling a big brother and little sister dynamic, which my therapist views as a positive sign. Despite 17's shattered innocence, he sees innocence in Anna that he wants to protect. So we decided last Monday to go to City Hall and get married. It took 24 hours to get the marriage license, and the reveal was the most uneventful ever. Oz mentioned, as if no one didn't see this coming, and Big Sis said, now placing bets on when the now expecting post goes up. We thought we were keeping our relationship under wraps, but apparently everyone had figured it out already. This woman has professed her undying, unconditional love for me, laying in my arms and expressing happiness. She shared her feelings about me over the past 25 years, even during her marriage to Sue. She lamented that Sue won and admitted to occasional thoughts of having an affair with me. Despite that, throughout all the years I've known her, she has given me so much and asked so little in return. Even the woman I married and had 2 children with has never shown the amount of love to me that Nina has. It would be foolish not to give her my name. So now, she has it, and we're in the early stages of paperwork for me adopting Anna. And lastly, there's Sue. I haven't communicated with her since my last visit to our marital home nearly 4 months ago. However, mutual friends, the few that remain, occasionally provide me with updates. Through one of those friends, a realtor, I learned that she sold the house, and he offered her a position as a clerical assistant in his firm, waiving the assisted payments I had to make due to her unemployment. She now resides in a small apartment close to his office, which he also helped arrange. She's functional, but a mere semblance of her former self. Her weight gain has been minimal, and she keeps to herself, focusing on her work and avoiding socializing with anyone but him, likely due to the origins of the issue beginning with her socializing with coworkers. The last update I received about her was at the end of March, where I expressed gratitude to him for looking out for her, but made it clear I no longer needed updates. She's no longer my concern. As 17 approaches legal adulthood in a year, I have no reason to engage with her again, and I won't. And that concludes my journey of betrayal, revenge, attempted ending, and mental agony. After this, I'm retreating back into the swamp to live with my new frog wife and her little tadpole. December 24th marked the 2-year anniversary of the night I served divorce papers to my ex and left her for good. Much has transpired since then, and as I reflect on where my life was compared to where I am now, it amazes me that I'm still standing. A lesser man might have crumbled under the weight of all I experienced. 2 crucial factors compelled me to persevere. Firstly, my youngest son needed me to set an example of standing up for oneself and not allowing a partner to walk all over you or control the narrative. At the time of D-Day, he had experienced being cheated on by his first girlfriend. The idea of his own mother doing the same to me, akin to what his ex-girlfriend did to him, significantly affected him. Secondly, there's my now girlfriend Nina, whom I've known for 25 years. She had been in my life before my ex, Sue. Over the course of everything, I discovered that Nina had harbored feelings for me since our teenage years, but never mustered the courage to confess. When Sue entered the picture, Nina stepped back and let me go. However, she has loved me from the shadows ever since. Witnessing my struggles, she felt it was time to reveal her feelings, and we've been together ever since. Life has moved forward. Nina and I are now living together in a civil union, enjoying all the benefits of marriage without the associated headaches. In the unlikely event we decide to part ways, we simply break the contract and go our separate ways with what we brought to the union. No lawyers, no messy paperwork. I doubt that day will come. Nina was previously married with a now 6-year-old daughter. We both agreed from the start never to marry again, leading us to pursue the civil union route. My sons and her daughter are inseparable when together. My boys revealed their desire for a little sister, and she has seamlessly filled that role. The relationship between her and 18 has blossomed into the classic big brother, little sister dynamic, which brings me immense joy. There was a point where I feared 18 would shut himself off completely, but thanks to therapy and our discussions, he has come full circle. He remains a bit shy around girls his age, and I'm not pressuring him. He'll get back on track when he's ready. 23 and his fiancée are now officially married as of August this year. The wedding was remarkable, mostly funded by her parents. Despite my insistence on contributing, her father, with whom I've developed a good friendship, was well aware of the divorce circumstances and assured me that he and his wife would cover all expenses. Sue, my ex-wife, attended the wedding. 23 is on better terms with his mother than 18, who hasn't communicated with her since the upheaval began. It's his choice, and I won't force him to maintain a relationship or communication until he's ready. Seating arrangements were made to avoid us laying eyes on each other, though I did catch a glimpse of her, or what's left of her. The woman I saw wasn't the one I married. She looked frail and weak. The divorce evidently took a hefty toll on her. In my heart, I wanted to feel pity, but there was absolutely nothing there. Nina, at one point, grabbed my arm tightly and asked if I was okay. I assured her I was fine and that today was about my son becoming a husband, nothing more. Continuing from that, I received perhaps the best news when we went to 23 and his wife's place for Thanksgiving. She's a chef and lives for big events. I'm going to be a grandpa. His wife was 1.5 months pregnant at the time. After dinner, I shared a congratulatory cigar with my son, and we had an extensive man-to-man talk, the first since it all started. He confided in me that he was nervous, mentioning that he wouldn't know what to do if something similar happened to him. I advised him that you can't force anyone to be loyal, emphasizing that you only control yourself and how you handle such situations. It's how you handle it that defines you. Soft times make you happy, hard times make you aware. I don't think he has anything to worry about. His wife admires him, and she has been by his side through it all. I cherish her for keeping my son focused and on track, as a good woman should for her man. The gender reveal is next month, and I secretly hope it's a girl. On the home front, Nina and I are in the early stages of discussing the possibility of me adopting her little girl and her taking my name. Although she currently has her father's last name, he has been out of the picture since she was 1, making 0 attempts to make contact. We don't even know if he's still alive, and he's definitely not in the US anymore. Nina was born here, but is of Albanian descent. Her ex was born in Albania and had dual citizenship. He's likely back in Albania, and we'll never see him again. Nothing is definite, but Nina has made it clear she doesn't want her daughter to carry her ex's name, and that's it. I've been living my life one day at a time, working hard, and spending time with the love of my life and her darling daughter. Life goes on. To all of you in the darkness, questioning if it ever ends and if you will heal from betrayal, the answer is yes. Commit yourself to not letting the darkness consume you. You mean too much to too many people to let that happen. Reach out to those who love and care for you. Walking the path of recovering from infidelity alone is a fool's errand. No good comes of it. Put your faith in those who will support you. As for your cheating partner, expose the truth once you have it. Find proof, protect your heart and assets, plan your exit strategy, and make the truth known. Never let them control the narrative, accept gaslighting, or succumb to blame shifting. Trust your instincts. If your gut says something is wrong, find out the truth. Never ignore the red flags. When wearing rose-colored glasses, they're impossible to see.
Story 3.
My parents and ex-husband turned against me when they found out I was infertile. Now they're trying to reconnect after seeing me with my newborn daughter. So, I, 30 female, recently bumped into my parents and my ex-husband, Scott, 33 male. And I really don't know how to feel about that meeting. For context, my parents and I have not been on speaking terms for almost 3 years, and it's the same with my ex-husband. We got divorced 3 years back, and since then, we haven't been in touch. In fact, I've done everything in my power to make sure that I don't have to see them again because they pretty much ruined my life and my mental health. Back when I was still with them, to the extent that I felt like I didn't even deserve to exist. After my divorce, I moved to the suburbs and tried to build a separate life for myself away from everyone and everything attached to my past. So, running into them recently has been a huge shock for me, and I kind of said certain things to them that I'm not sure were the best move for me. My parents had always wanted a son, and it's not like they treated me badly growing up, but it was very obvious to me that they would have treated me differently if I had been a boy. My mother had even spoken about it on several occasions, and I had tried my best to be the son that they never had, but I couldn't succeed. After I graduated from college and started living separately, I still tried to stay in touch with my parents because no matter what, they were still my family. And they were the only family that I had because I wasn't particularly close to my grandparents, and neither did I have any uncles or aunts who would be there for me. So, I had accepted my fate that, no matter how much they pushed me away, they were still my only family, and even if they did not seem very interested in keeping in touch with me, I still tried to maintain contact. Then, when I was around 23 years old, I started dating Scott. We had met at a concert and had an instant spark, so after dating for 6 months, I introduced him to my parents. And that's when my parents started putting in more of an effort to keep in touch with me. They would call me more often and ask me about my relationship, and basically expressed more of an interest in my life. I had noticed this change, but because it was a welcome change, I did not think much of it and just accepted it. The longer I dated Scott, the more involved my parents became in my life, and after one point, it felt like we were all just one big happy family. I was quite happy about it because this was all I had ever wanted, so I did not question it, even though I really should have. Anyway, after a little over 2 years of dating, we got engaged, and then we got married after having spent 3 years together. After we got married, things were pretty great for a while, and I was enjoying my life as a newlywed, but 6 months after my wedding, my parents started hinting that they wanted a grandchild. I was just 26 at the time, and I wasn't exactly ready. I wanted to wait for a couple more years before I started trying for a baby, but at their insistence, I had the talk with Scott. And he was for the idea of starting a family. So, because of his enthusiasm, we decided to start trying for a baby soon after we got married. We tried for a really long time, but even after several months had passed, we had not been successful in conceiving. We started to suspect that maybe something was not right and decided to get tested. Unfortunately, it turned out that I was infertile. It came as a huge shock to both of us, but more than us, it was my parents who were disappointed, and they had not even bothered to hide it. The day that we announced it to both our parents, my dad actually walked out afterward instead of comforting me. We decided to stop trying for a while, and Scott and I had a discussion about trying other ways like IVF, but that would cost us a lot, and success during our first attempt was not even guaranteed. So, we had to put our plans of starting a family on hold for a while until we had made more money and would be able to afford several rounds of IVF. We were content with that, even though we were a bit upset, but my parents were extremely unhappy. They stopped visiting, they stopped talking to me. And no matter how much I tried to explain to them that this was not exactly my fault, they were just not ready to hear it. After a few weeks had passed, I felt so let down by their behavior that I called them up and gave them a piece of my mind. I told them that they had been treating me a little too cruelly just because I couldn't give them a grandchild right now. And that made me doubt whether they were even capable of being good grandparents when I would actually be able to have a kid. I told them that they had treated me harshly all my life just because I was not a guy, and I could see how differently they treated my husband. For a really long time, I had tried to ignore all of that and maintain our relationship. But now I was not interested in keeping in touch with them anymore, and I would appreciate it if they stayed away from me forever. It was very hard for me to do that because for a really long time, I had wanted nothing but their approval, but now I realized it was next to impossible. But instead of being sorry about it, they decided to double down on what they were doing, and they were fine with me not speaking to them again because I was worthless as a woman anyway since I couldn't have kids. And they wanted nothing to do with me. It hurt to hear them say it, but at least I knew where I stood with them after that. After that phone call, I didn't really speak to my parents, and we were done. When I told Scott about that phone call, he was very empathetic at first, but after a few days, I started noticing that even his behavior towards me was changing. I ignored it at first because I was already going through a really tough time mentally, so I didn't want to admit to myself that maybe even my husband was going to leave me. So, I started pretending that nothing was happening and everything was fine. But within a few months, he had turned into a completely different person and was really cold to me all the time. I tried my best to save our relationship by putting in the effort that I could, but it did not help because after 3 months, he showed up at home with divorce papers and said that he was done with me. I couldn't say that I was shocked, but I still tried to reason with him, and I told him that we could always try for a baby later. But he told me that there were a lot of reasons that he wanted to leave, and he just didn't want to get into it. He wanted this to be over as soon as possible because it was difficult for both of us. The divorce took almost 7 months to be finalized, and those were the toughest of my life so far. I was completely on my own, and I had really broken down. To make matters worse, a couple of weeks after he told me that he wanted a divorce and had moved out, I found out from a few relatives that Scott was apparently living with my parents. I knew that talking to them wouldn't help, so I decided to talk to my in-laws about it, and it was a very uncomfortable conversation. But they said that my parents had apparently been in touch with Scott for the past few months, and I guess they had been brainwashing him into leaving me or something, which is why Scott had decided to leave. Even though my in-laws did not think it was a good idea. But he had fought with them and wasn't speaking to them anymore. I don't know the specifics of what they had told Scott. But I remember my in-laws telling me that Scott had implied that my own parents had said that he deserved better. So, I'm still not sure what exactly they had told him, but I guess they were just desperate to have a son in any way whatsoever. And since I wasn't speaking to them anymore, neither could they hope for a grandchild from me. And soon they decided to take Scott under their wing and got him to leave me. So, I was left pretty broken after my divorce, and it took me several months to get back on my feet, but I was able to do it. Since then, I have not looked back and have done everything in my power to forget about the past and move on. After the divorce, I moved out of my house to the suburbs. I got a new job, changed my look and everything, and blocked my parents and Scott on social media. I also told all of my old friends and relatives that I did not want to hear anything about them ever again, and neither did I want them to know anything about me. All of them just respected that, and for the past 3 years, I've been in therapy and have been living pretty well. The only thing that had been bothering me was the absence of a baby, because even though I did not have a husband or parents anymore, I still wanted a child. I feel like I was ready to be a mother, and last year I started IVF treatments and got pregnant with the help of an anonymous donor. And 4 months ago, I gave birth to my baby girl. Life has been pretty great since she was born, and I'm really happy. About 4 days ago, I had been strolling down the street with her, which is when I bumped into my parents and Scott. I was really shocked to see them on my street at first, and I thought that they were here to see me, but I realized that they were walking out of a house a couple of blocks away. When they spotted me, I literally froze, and I should have gone back home, but I just didn't have it in me to move. So they walked over to me, greeted me, and then immediately asked about the baby because, to their knowledge, I was infertile. I responded to them with the truth, and by then I had processed what was happening and was starting to walk back home. But Scott stopped me and said that he was really glad that he had bumped into me because he had been thinking about me a lot recently. Apparently, they had come here to visit his aunt, who had recently moved into this neighborhood, and he thought that bumping into me was a sign from the universe that he should make things right with me again and give our relationship a second chance. My parents were also standing right there, and they insisted that I invite them home and we have a chat about everything that's been going on in my life since they have clearly missed out on a lot. I was honestly appalled that they were even saying any of this, and actually thought that I was going to invite them in, after all that had happened in the past. It had taken me 3 whole years to move on from it, and I'm still in therapy, trying to work on my feelings, so I kind of had a bit of an outburst. I told them that I would rather invite a bunch of bloodthirsty wild animals into my house than them, because they would still be better. I told them to cut the crap and stop pretending like they actually cared about me or what was going on with me, because the only reason they wanted to speak to me was because I now had a baby. My parents wanted to speak to me because they were finally going to get a grandkid, and Scott wanted to talk to me because, obviously, he hadn't been able to find anyone else. And he thought that since I had been able to get pregnant once, getting pregnant again would not be a problem, and he could just waltz back into my life again. It was sickening that all they saw me as was a source of babies and not a real person with real feelings. They had all abandoned me when I needed them the most to support me emotionally, even though I had expected it from my parents because they had already made it very clear to me right from my childhood that they would much rather prefer a boy, and in their opinion, the only value that a woman had was defined by whether she was capable of being a mother or not. But the real shocker had been Scott, who had spent so many years with me and even comforted me, but in spite of all of that, he had gone along with whatever my parents had said for some twisted reason and left me when I was at my lowest. I hadn't forgotten any of the things that they had said to me, and I just repeated it back to them. So, since I was worthless as a woman and since Scott deserved better, maybe they should leave me alone now. Honestly, I've always been a very quiet, shy person, but when they confronted me in the street that day, I had been yelling at them at the top of my lungs. It was 3 years' worth of anger coming out all at once, so it had been pretty nasty, and once I was done yelling at them, I made a run for it back to my house and shut the door as quickly as I could. I had been feeling extremely sick after that, so I decided not to go to work for a couple of days and have been staying at home with my baby since then. My interaction with my parents and Scott had been playing in my head on a loop since then. I honestly had no idea what I was going to do about it until last evening when I received a call from an unknown number. I don't know why, I usually don't answer calls from numbers that are not known to me, but yesterday I decided to pick up the phone. It was Scott on the other end, and behind him, I could hear my parents whispering in the background. I'm pretty sure they were not even trying to be quiet. They actually wanted me to know that they were there. Anyway, I tried not to let myself be too affected by that. I just told him that I wanted him not to call me again because otherwise I would be forced to take precautionary steps against him. And I did not want to do that. I told him the same thing went for my parents as well. I did not want anything to do with them, and the only reason I had even picked up the call was because I wanted them to know that I was done. I had been done 3 years back as well, and I'm still going to be sticking to it. But Scott told me to hear him out, and in spite of myself, I couldn't hang up. So, I let him speak, and he told me that he knew that he had messed up, and so had my parents, but it was just coming from a place of disappointment. He told me that both my parents and even he himself had really been looking forward to starting a family and having a baby in the family and whatnot. Finding out that I was infertile and wasn't even willing to go through IVF until we had enough money was difficult to come to terms with for them, and they hadn't dealt with it in the best way possible. But now they really wanted me to give them a second chance to prove that they were worthy of being a part of my family. After a few seconds, I told him that I did not buy any of the nonsense that they were trying to sell me. They wouldn't have cared about me if they hadn't seen me with the baby that day, and that was the bottom line. That was the truth of the matter, and I was sick of them trying to pretend that it wasn't. Then I was about to hang up, but my parents piped up from the back and said that this was the exact kind of behavior that they had cut me off for. Apparently, they believed that I had been very selfish and was only thinking about myself when I found out that I was infertile. So, instead of giving everybody their space, I kept forcing my presence onto them and kept trying to get them to comfort me and pay attention to me all the time, even though they were struggling with the news themselves as well. And that's why everyone had ended up pushing me away, which is how I ended up in the position of having no one there for me. I did not entertain the conversation after that. I just hung up. And I really do know that they were just trying to gaslight me, but I can't help but doubt myself now. So, just for my own peace of mind, I need to ask AET because I asked for reassurance after I found out that I was infertile? Edit. So, first of all, a lot of people wanted to know why my parents had not tried for another baby after I was born if they wanted a boy so badly. Well, my mother had to deal with a lot of complications during her first pregnancy as well, and the doctors had suggested waiting for a couple of years before they tried for another one. But even when she had me, she was in her mid-30s. Waiting for a few more years would mean that she had to wait until her late 30s, which would mean that the pregnancy would be even more risky. Just like I had to struggle a lot to conceive and eventually found out that I was infertile, my mother also had to struggle a lot to conceive me. The only catch was that when she was struggling, it was her mother-in-law who was nasty to her. But this time with me, it was my own mother who couldn't spare a thought about me. Anyway, that was the reason why they could not have another child and were stuck with just me, a daughter. And I don't really know exactly what kind of relationship Scott had with his parents, but from whatever I had observed, they seemed to get along pretty well. As of now, I don't know if they have been able to make up after the last fallout that they had, since I haven't kept in touch with his parents, and I obviously haven't spoken to Scott about it. But Scott is an only child. He definitely did not have any competition, and whenever I visited his parents, I could see that they really loved him, and he had been treated well right from his childhood. So, I really have no idea why he latched on to my parents like he did. At least with my parents, I knew that they wanted a son, which is why they started treating Scott like that, but with him, I had no idea what went wrong. In the past 3 years, I had only been trying to forget about all of this, so I hadn't really thought about it or questioned it. But now that you guys bring it up, I feel like I have to speak to my ex-in-laws and get to the bottom of it, for my curiosity if nothing else. Anyway, I hope this clears up any doubts that people have. Update 1, I decided to speak to my ex-in-laws and get to the bottom of why exactly Scott has been behaving the way he has. Honestly, I couldn't think of a single reason why he would need to visit his aunt with my parents. That was just strange. And I already knew that this was not my fault. They had abandoned me when I needed them because they are terrible people, and I knew that they were just trying to gaslight me. I only wanted some reassurance, and I did not want to bother my friends with this since it's too personal, and that's why I posted it here. So, thank you so much to everyone who reassured me and made sure that I knew that I was not the bad guy here. Anyway, it was quite awkward to reach out to them after 3 years of having no contact, because the last time I had spoken to them was around the time of the divorce. But luckily, they were quite glad to hear from me, and after a bit of small talk, I decided to get to the point and ask them why exactly Scott was so close to my parents, and if they had been in touch with him or not. They told me that a couple of months after their last fight, they had actually been able to make things up with Scott and were in touch with him right now, but he had also remained in touch with my parents. They told me that he had been loved as a kid, so it was not like he was trying to replace his parents with mine, but apparently, my parents had been pretty shady. Right from the beginning of our relationship, they would try to get him on their side. Even while we were dating, Scott would tell his parents that my parents would occasionally invite him to dinner even when I was busy, and he would be there for them separately. He thought that this was something worth bragging about because he believed that he had impressed my parents simply by being himself, which was kind of true because he was a guy, and that was enough to impress my parents. So, they had already spent a lot of one-on-one time together without my knowledge, and he had started looking up to them as parental figures, even though he had parents of his own and he respected them as well. It was just really complicated. And on top of that, my parents constantly showered him with really expensive stuff and would write him checks all the time. That's the money that Scott had offered to use for IVF back when we were together. But I thought he was bluffing because back then we did not have that sort of money. And never did I want him to do anything shady for the money. And he didn't want to tell me that he had received a bunch of money from my parents because then he would have to come clean to me about the kind of relationship that he had with them. But even after that, I refused to get IVF because I didn't think that he had the money, and I wanted to save. And that's what my parents used to manipulate him into going against me and saying that he deserved better, somebody who had faith in him. Eventually, in a couple of months, they were able to brainwash him, which is how he ended up leaving me. My ex-in-laws apologized to me for it, but also explained that, even though they did not agree with the kind of relationship that Scott had with my parents, he was their only son, so they couldn't cut him off either. And I don't blame them. They don't owe this to me, and they were just being nice by telling the truth. But anyway, now that I know what the truth is, I don't have any reason to entertain them if they reach out to me. They're all disgusting people and not worth my time. Update 2. I finally decided to go back to work after almost taking 2 weeks off. Luckily, I have quite a lot of days left over from my maternity leave since I didn't take the full 6 months off in one go, and my company's policy is quite flexible. It was just my daughter and her nanny at home, and I trust the woman implicitly. She has a bunch of references, and I know her personally as well. She's a really good woman. So, halfway into the workday, when I received a phone call from her, and she immediately told me that she had decided to take my daughter home with her, since she wasn't sure if staying in my house would be safe or not because of my ex-husband. I decided to let her go home with my daughter so that they would be safe and immediately called the cops while driving back home myself. On the phone, she had already informed me that Scott had been standing outside for a couple of minutes and had been screaming for me to come out. And when he realized that I was not in there, he started trying to kick the door down. He was cursing really loudly, and my daughter had been crying. So, she had done some quick thinking and had called me so I could inform the police, and she could leave through the back door and walk to her house through the gate in the backyard since she lived a couple of minutes away. And while I dealt with my ex-husband and the cops, at least my baby would be safe and sound. Honestly, kudos to her because her top priority was my child's safety and well-being, and that's how it should be. Anyway, once I got home, the cop had already arrived, and it was very obvious to me that Scott had been drinking. It was weird because it was just around 12 in the afternoon, and that was no time to be drunk, but there he was. I decided to press charges against him because he had really pissed me off, and I wanted him out. Also, this would give me an excuse to get a restraining order against him because he was clearly losing his marbles. Anyway, they were able to take him away, and a couple of minutes later, my nanny came back home with my daughter, and I gave her the rest of the day off because I was going to stay home with my daughter. I guess I'm going to have to take a couple more days off from work, but I'm not really complaining since I got to spend it with my favorite person. Update 3. Hey, so it's been a couple of weeks since I last posted here. I got really busy with taking care of my baby, and I also just decided to take on a new project. It's been pretty exciting. But here's the situation with my parents and Scott. So, I was able to get the restraining order against Scott, thankfully. It was not much of a struggle because I had security footage from the day that he visited me while drunk and started throwing a fit when he discovered that I was not at home. I guess my parents took a look at his situation and decided not to bother me, so they have been staying away. But my ex-in-laws informed me that after what happened to me, they have decided not to keep in touch with Scott. He had apparently been having a hard time finding other women, even though he really wanted to start a family. He can't do that without a partner, and he doesn't like the idea of adopting, so maybe that explains why he was acting out the other day. But it doesn't mean I have to forgive him, especially not after whatever he's put me through. And that includes my parents as well. That doesn't mean that they have shut up about the situation, though. They are very much still trying to badmouth me to my relatives, and it's just sad because it's really not working. Everyone knows that they were the ones who did the worst thing possible to me, and now they are trying to pretend like they are the victims here. That's not how it works, and they had to learn the hard way. Anyway, I'm glad that they are never going to be able to have any contact with their grandchild. I'm just not going to allow it. My daughter and I are going to lead a wonderful life together without anyone bothering us, and I'm definitely going to be a much better parent than the ones that I had as an example.
Story 4.
The earliest days of my relationship with Miranda were a whirlwind of emotions and shared dreams. We met during our first year at college, a chance encounter in the library over a shared textbook. She was vivacious and determined, balancing a full course load with a part-time job, while I was a hopeful baseball scholarship student, trying to keep up with the demands of both academics and athletics. Our connection was instant, and it wasn't long before late-night study sessions turned into dates, and eventually, love. Life had other plans for us, though. By our sophomore year, Miranda discovered she was pregnant. The news was both shocking and grounding. At just 18 years old, we were thrust into adulthood, a whirlwind of decisions to make and lives to rearrange. Dropping out of college to work full-time wasn't part of my original plan, but it felt like the only choice. Miranda, ever ambitious, found a way to continue her studies online while navigating the complexities of impending motherhood. Our families rallied around us, their support a beacon of hope during those tumultuous times. My parents gifted us their modest home as a wedding present, moving to Florida to start their retirement early. Miranda's parents, grieving the loss of their eldest son years earlier, embraced their role as doting grandparents to our twins when they arrived. Luke and Kelly brought light into our lives, and though our days were chaotic, they were also filled with a kind of joy I had never experienced before. The financial strain was a constant shadow, though. I took on a job selling insurance, working long hours with the promise of lucrative commissions. Miranda's part-time job as a secretary and her parents' assistance with the twins helped ease the burden. Despite the challenges, we managed to find pockets of happiness, celebrating milestones, planning family outings, and nurturing a love that felt unbreakable, or so I believed. Over time, cracks began to form in the foundation of our relationship. My career gained momentum, but the demands of work took me further from home. Miranda's job with Dan, our close family friend, grew into something more than just a professional partnership. Even as I noticed subtle shifts in her demeanor, I convinced myself it was the stress of balancing work, family, and her aspirations. The truth, however, was far more insidious. Looking back now, the signs were there all along. From the lingering glances between Miranda and Dan to the private jokes I wasn't privy to, their bond deepened under the guise of camaraderie. Naivety and misplaced trust blinded me to the reality unfolding before me. Yet, through it all, I clung to the belief that our love, born out of youthful passion and forged through shared adversity, would weather any storm. The last 5 days were a whirlwind, filled with a flurry of activity and countless miles clocked on our dependable minivan. Now, barely 20 minutes after parking in the driveway, I found myself sinking into my favorite time-worn porch chair, sipping a rich, dark porter. My mind wandered to thoughts of the twins, now navigating their first taste of independence without Miranda and me constantly around. Our recent trip marked a significant milestone, transitioning from a bustling family home to the quieter reality of an empty nest. As I relaxed, I doubted that any other parent facing this same chapter could truly grasp the tangled web of emotions coursing through me. Our journey began with a stop in Atlanta, where we helped Luke settle into his dorm at Georgia Tech. Handing over the rental car ended the exhausting juggling act of shared driving responsibilities. The following day, we waved goodbye to Kelly at the airport as she boarded a flight to Gainesville, eager to embrace her new life as a Florida Gator. With our parental duties momentarily behind us, Miranda and I headed east to Daytona Beach for a brief reprieve. Those few sun-soaked days by the ocean were some of the most meaningful and heartfelt moments of our marriage. Having become parents so young at only 18, we now found ourselves at 36, rediscovering a shared vitality and zest for life. One memorable stop along the way had Miranda playfully reminding me of her adventurous spirit, rekindling a spark I thought had dimmed. Now, as I reclined in my chair, savoring those happy memories, Miranda had gone upstairs to shower. A faint sound caught my attention, the hum of her hairdryer. That was unusual. She typically reserved it for workdays or special outings. Moments later, the rhythmic click of her heels echoed from the kitchen, another rarity since she usually preferred slippers or bare feet at home. Before I could dwell on these oddities, her voice called out to me. "Alan, could you come sit with me for a moment? I need to talk to you. It won't take long." I snapped out of my daydream, grabbed my empty glass, and headed toward her, cheerfully responding, "Be right there, sweetheart." As I entered the kitchen, I was startled to find her sitting at the table, dressed in a crisp blouse and clean jeans, looking composed and polished. She'd poured me a fresh mug of coffee and placed it at the spot across from her. Her expression was serious, almost tense, and I had no idea what this sudden formality was about. I slowly settled into the chair she'd clearly intended for me. "What's going on, Miri?" I asked, gently, wrapping my hands around the steaming mug and taking a sip. Without hesitation, she replied in an unnervingly calm voice, "I'm leaving you, Alan." She reached for a thick envelope on the table. "These are the divorce papers for you to review and sign." Miranda's words hit me like a sledgehammer. My mind reeled, paralyzed by the shock. It felt like a brutal uppercut in a boxing ring, a blow that left me dazed and unable to react. She slid an envelope across the table toward me, her voice cutting through my disbelief with a detached, business-like precision. "All the terms are outlined here," she began, her tone calm but devoid of warmth. "I'm not asking for anything from you. Everything I'm leaving behind in this house is yours to keep. The savings have been divided, the bills are paid, and all joint credit cards are canceled. Everyone who needs to know about my new address has already been informed. If you have questions, contact me through my attorney." I stared at the envelope, unable to process her words. Miranda took a measured breath and continued, her voice as emotionless as before. "I've also secured a restraining order to ensure there's no further contact between us. My phone number and email have been changed, and all my old accounts are closed." I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The coffee in front of me sat untouched, its thin wisp of steam fading into the air. Miranda's next words pierced the heavy silence. "Please don't involve the kids or try to extract information from them," she said, her gaze steady. "They're aware of the situation and won't intervene. The same goes for my parents." Her tone remained calm, but her words felt final, like a door slamming shut. I sat frozen, a spectator in my own life, while she delivered the closing remarks of what once was us. Her voice softened, but her words cut just as deeply. She met my eyes with a cold, unwavering stare. "I know you'll wonder about this, so let me be honest. I've been with Dan for 13 years. I'm finally ready to make him my full-time husband. I used to love you, Alan, but I love him more. He's waited patiently for this, and I owe it to him to make it right. This is the end. Goodbye, Alan." She stood, leaving the table and heading for the door. Only when she grabbed her bag and opened the front door did I finally find my voice. In a hoarse whisper, I managed a single word. "Why?" She paused, her expression unreadable, and glanced back at me. "Sandy Thompson," she said flatly, before stepping outside and shutting the door behind her. The echoes of her heels, the thud of the car door, and the fading growl of the engine were the only sounds that followed as she disappeared into the night. I didn't see or hear from Miranda for the next 16 months. The man she referred to as Daddy at work was none other than Dan Roberts, someone I had considered my closest and most trusted friend for almost 2 decades. Miranda and Dan's wife, Lisa, had bonded deeply during their pregnancies. They became inseparable, almost like sisters, drawn together by their similar ages. Lisa was 22 and Miranda had just turned 18. Adding to their connection, Lisa's daughter Cassie was born a day after our twins, which the two women saw as a sign of fate. Their friendship blossomed into such a close-knit dynamic that our families naturally spent a lot of time together. Over the years, our two households practically merged into one extended family. Living only 2 blocks apart, we shared weekends, meals, and milestones until the surprise arrival of our twins reshaped our lives. At the time, Miranda and I were both still in college. She had aspirations of studying business, while I was pursuing a degree in mathematics. Supported by a partial scholarship through my spot on the college baseball team, my future felt uncertain, with no clear path ahead. But everything changed when Miranda announced her pregnancy. Suddenly, my priorities shifted, and I abandoned my dreams to provide for the family we were about to start. Our parents rallied around us, organizing a wedding within 2 months. Being their only child, my parents had always showered me with love and support, especially since they had waited until their late 30s to have me after years of believing they might never have children. Miranda, on the other hand, had grown up with an older brother, Tom, who was 10 years her senior. He left for college when she was a child and tragically passed away in a car accident shortly after graduating. The loss pushed her parents to focus all their attention on Miranda, just as my parents did for me. As a wedding gift, my parents gave us the deed to their old family home, planning to move south and retire within a few years. I took a job at a local insurance company, selling policies. The base salary was modest, but the potential for commissions made the long hours worthwhile. I often worked 12-hour days, sometimes even on weekends. Meanwhile, Miranda took a part-time job as a secretary and continued her studies online, determined to complete her degree. Her parents were a lifeline during this period, always eager to visit and help with the twins, who quickly became the center of their world. 3 years later, the fragile foundation of our lives began to crack. By then, I had made significant strides in my career and was nominated as Salesperson of the Year for our North Carolina region. My small company, which had recently risen to prominence and was on the verge of being acquired by a national corporation, had high hopes for me. As part of the recognition, I received a $2,500 bonus and an all-expenses-paid trip to Washington, D.C. for a 3-night awards ceremony. The trip included a formal dinner on the first night to announce the top salesperson, followed by 2 days of leisure. Miranda and I were excited. This was to be our first getaway together without the kids since their birth. But our plans unraveled just days before the trip. Luke came down with whooping cough, and Kelly soon followed. Since my attendance at the ceremony was mandatory, Miranda reluctantly stayed behind, urging me to enjoy the trip despite her disappointment. I arrived in D.C. just an hour before the gala, checked in, and let the organizers know I'd be attending alone. After freshening up, I dressed in my rented tuxedo and made my way to the banquet hall, where I was seated next to Sandy Thompson, a young woman from our Little Rock office. Sandy was only a year older than me, making us 2 of the youngest attendees at the event. The evening featured an open bar, and though I was inexperienced with booze, I indulged in a couple of glasses of wine. To my utter shock, my name was announced as the Salesperson of the Year. I stumbled to the stage, accepted the award, and returned to my seat, where a bottle of champagne awaited as a gift from management. The rest of the night became a haze. I only have fragments of memories, but the stark reality hit me when I woke up the next morning at 5 a.m., lying in bed next to an unclothed Sandy Thompson. Panic set in, my head pounded, and my stomach churned as I scrambled to dress and return to my own room. Within 20 minutes, I had packed my belongings and checked out, speeding home in a state of sheer terror. Miranda was surprised to see me return 4 hours earlier than expected, but her joy quickly turned to disbelief when I confessed. I told her I had been drinking at the gala, blacked out, and woke up in another woman's bed. Her face hardened as I spoke, and she cut me off mid-sentence. The only question she asked was, "What's her name?" Before I could answer, she grabbed a bag, packed a few things, and stormed out, leaving me alone with the twins for 3 days. During that time, she ignored all my calls. When she finally returned, she acted as though nothing had happened. Any attempt I made to discuss the situation was immediately shut down. With an icy glare, she warned me, "If you ever bring this up again, I'll leave, take the kids, and you'll never see us again." That night, Miranda and I had sex, but it felt cold and detached. It lacked any closeness or affection, just an intense mechanical encounter that lasted nearly 90 minutes. It would take many months for any sense of closeness to return to our physical relationship, but eventually it did. Per her request, the incident was never mentioned again. The following year, Miranda graduated with her business degree and was eager to start a career that aligned with her education. Our friendship with Dan and Lisa grew stronger, and weekends were routinely spent together, unless work obligations intervened. Even then, our wives often found time to meet on their own. Things became a little less convenient when Dan and Lisa moved 15 miles away to be closer to his job. Coincidentally, Miranda's parents also relocated to the same area, renting a larger apartment that allowed them to spend more time with their grandchildren. They even began looking after Dan and Lisa's daughter, Cassie, which gave the couple more freedom. As Dan's company expanded, he needed both an office manager and a personal assistant. Miranda seemed perfect for the role, and after interviewing with the hiring managers, she secured the job. She thrived in the position, and her professional relationship with Dan only deepened. Over time, the playful nickname Dan's work wife became a regular joke among friends. This arrangement lasted 7 years until tragedy struck. Lisa died unexpectedly from a brain aneurysm. The devastating event happened during one of her visits to my house, a routine occurrence whenever Dan and Miranda were away on business trips together. Lisa's end was a crushing loss for all of us, but it hit Dan the hardest. Struggling to cope with his grief, he found it impossible to manage both his emotions and the responsibilities of raising his 11-year-old daughter alone. To help, Miranda began visiting their house 3 evenings a week after work. She made sure the home was tidy and prepared dinners that Dan could easily reheat. At least, that's how she explained it to me. 16 months later, I was carrying the last box from the garage to load into my minivan when I saw Miranda's car pull into the driveway. It was the first time she'd been back since the day she handed me divorce papers in the kitchen and walked out of my life. I certainly hadn't expected to see her now. "Miranda, aren't you breaking the restraining order by being here?" I asked in a calm, neutral tone. She gave a dismissive wave. "That expired the day our divorce was finalized?" "How are you?" she asked, jingling her keys. I shrugged. "I'm managing, living in the moment, hoping for a brighter future. Want some coffee?" I called over my shoulder as I headed back toward the house. "That sounds nice," she replied, following me inside. The house was nearly empty, save for a few boxes and a dining table in the kitchen. Most of the furniture and appliances had either been sold or donated, with the remainder set for disposal. A former colleague's son had agreed to haul away the last of it before I handed over the keys to the new owners. On the mantel in the living room sat a single birthday card from my co-workers, wishing me well for my 38th birthday and my upcoming movie. I poured 2 cups of coffee, and we sat at the same table where, 16 months earlier, she'd coldly ended our marriage. "So, what brings you here today?" I asked, sipping my coffee and eyeing her with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. She frowned. "The kids told me you're moving. I don't understand why you didn't call them to tell them directly. Why send letters?" "It was the only way to make sure they'd know," I replied. "Otherwise, they might accuse me of disappearing without a word. Besides, I was just calling them. Well, at least Kelly. I don't have Luke's number." "What do you mean you don't have Luke's number?" Miranda asked, narrowing her eyes. "I mean exactly that. The kids don't want anything to do with me," I said, noticing her skeptical expression. She looked unconvinced, so I reached for my phone and dialed Kelly's number, putting the call on speaker. After several rings, it went to voicemail. "Your turn," I said, gesturing for Miranda to try. With a sigh, Miranda dialed Kelly's number and put the call on speaker. The phone barely rang twice before our daughter's cheerful voice came through. "Hi, Mom. What's up?" Kelly greeted brightly. "Hey, sweetie," Miranda said, her tone warm but casual. "Just checking in. What are you up to?" "Cassie and I are just hanging out," Kelly replied, her voice laced with laughter. "We're heading to a party later, but for now, we're just chilling and saving energy." Miranda shot me a glance before asking, "Have you talked to your father recently?" "Yeah, of course," Kelly said easily. "He told me he'd pick up Cassie and me in about 10 minutes. Then I think he's grabbing Luke before we head to the party." Hearing my daughter refer to Dan as her father was like a punch to the gut. I clenched my fists and stared at the ceiling, trying to suppress the wave of pain. "You mean Dan?" Miranda asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Yeah, Mom. Who else?" Kelly replied, laughing. "He loves it when I call him Dad, and, in 3 weeks he will officially be my dad." Her words left me hollow. Miranda didn't need to say anything. The look on her face said it all. She had always been able to read me like a book, and she knew exactly how much that careless remark had hurt me. In just 3 weeks, my ex-wife was set to remarry. To my surprise, they had even sent me an invitation to their wedding, as if I'd ever consider attending. The very idea was laughable. "Kelly Ann," Miranda said sharply, her tone tinged with irritation, "when was the last time you actually spoke to your real father?" "Oh, Mom!" Kelly hesitated, her voice losing its earlier playfulness. "I don't know. Maybe a few weeks ago?" Sensing her daughter's nervousness, Miranda's expression darkened. I silently held out my phone, showing her my call log filled with repeated, unanswered calls to Kelly's number. Miranda scanned the screen, her brow furrowing as the evidence sank in. It wasn't just Kelly. Neither of my kids had reached out to me since Miranda left. Not one call in over 16 months. "That's funny," Miranda said, her voice firm as she turned her attention back to the phone. "Because I'm sitting right next to him, and I watched him try to call you just now. Care to explain what's going on, Kelly?" Well, Kelly stammered, clearly caught off guard. "You listen to me," Miranda said, her voice sharper now. "You have one father, just one. And it's not Dan. We'll talk about this later." She ended the call abruptly, jabbing the button with frustration before setting the phone down. Her shoulders stiffened as she turned back to me. Why don't you have Luke's number? She demanded, her voice still tense. Dan got him a new phone the same day his old one was stolen, and Luke memorized the number immediately. Why didn't you? I shrugged. How would I know? Look, Miranda, don't come down too hard on them. Clearly their feelings for me were so strong that after a little over a year, they've completely forgotten I exist. I forced a bitter smile, intertwining my fingers tightly. You heard Kelly. She's thrilled to have a new dad. Out of sight, out of mind, right? Apparently, I'm nothing more than a shadow now. I gestured to my phone. You can see for yourself. I've tried to stay involved, but it's clear they don't want me in their lives. And in 3 weeks, I'll officially be replaced by the real dad. My words seemed to cut Miranda deeply, but they reflected the harsh reality. Since you left, I've spoken to both of them combined for maybe an hour. I made every effort to stay connected, but it didn't matter. I remember getting tickets to the Braves' opening game of the season and being so excited to tell Luke. When I called, he said he was too busy. Later, I found out he went to that very game with Dan and some friends. They bought tickets at the last minute. If that's what they prefer, what can I do? An awkward silence fell over us. Finally, Miranda cleared her throat. So you're moving closer to your parents? She asked quietly. Not exactly, I replied. I'm moving to take care of my mother. She needs full-time care now. Her eyes widened in alarm. Oh no, what happened? Is your father managing? Why didn't you tell me she was having problems? I let out a heavy sigh. You always cared about them, I said softly. Mom has late-stage Alzheimer's. Most of the time she doesn't recognize anything or anyone. And as for Dad, he passed away about 3 weeks ago. The doctors said it was a heart attack, but I know better. He died of a broken heart. Miranda gasped, her eyes filling with tears. How? Why didn't you call us to let us know? I did, I said, my voice tinged with exhaustion. The last time I spoke to Kelly was the day after Thanksgiving. I called to tell her what happened. She rushed me off the phone, said she was too busy, and promised to call back later. She never did. For weeks, I tried to reach out, but I eventually understood why she was avoiding me. I gave a bitter chuckle. Even though my kids blocked me on Facebook, they didn't block my dad. That's how I found out what Kelly was so busy with. While I was trying to tell her about her grandfather, she was out shopping on Black Friday, with you and Grandma Roberts. I paused, struggling to compose myself. As for my father's broken heart, it was my fault. I never told my parents about our divorce. I meant to, but every time I tried, something stopped me. When I went to visit them after you left, I found out how bad Mom's condition had become. I couldn't bring myself to pile even more heartbreak onto them. Every week that passed, it got harder and harder to tell them. I swallowed hard. But on Thanksgiving, after we finished dinner and Mom had gone to bed, Dad kept pressing me about why he hadn't heard from you or the kids in over a year. So I finally told him everything. About our breakup, your leaving, all of it. Miranda sat motionless, her hands pressed to her mouth as tears streamed down her pale face. The next morning I found him in his favorite chair, I continued, my voice hollow. He was holding our family photo, the one where we're all laughing and goofing around together. It was still damp with his tears. He was gone, Mary. The truth broke his heart. I turned away, staring out the window at the pale blue sky. Mom and Dad were married for 52 years. They came from a time when you stayed together no matter what. He thought you and I would last forever. Losing that hope, it eliminated him. The room was silent except for Miranda's quiet sobbing. Pressing my forehead against the cool glass, I spoke softly. At the funeral, I realized just how alone I've become. It was just me, the chaplain, and a couple of neighbors. Mom couldn't come. She wouldn't have understood what was happening. Even now, when she asks about Dad, I tell her he just stepped out and will be back soon. It's the only way to spare her the pain. Miranda was sobbing openly now, but I had no tears left to shed. Weeks of emotional exhaustion had left me completely drained. My unfocused gaze wandered around the nearly empty room until it landed on a lone greeting card sitting on the mantelpiece. Miranda, her tear-streaked face lifting, followed my eyes and noticed the card too. Speaking in a detached, almost foreign tone, I said, "You know, I may be alone now, with even my own mother unable to recognize me most days, but I owe her everything for bringing me into this world. That's why I'm packing up my life here, to be with her and care for her for however much time she has left." I turned to face Miranda, standing tall with my arms crossed. A bitter smirk twisted my expression as I delivered words laced with the sarcasm and anger I'd held back for far too long. It's remarkable, isn't it? The ripple effects of your choices. You didn't just destroy our marriage. You shattered my relationship with our kids, and on top of that, you tore apart my family. I knew my voice carried more venom than I intended, but the dam had finally broken. "Don't you dare pin all of this on me," Miranda shot back, leaping to her feet. "Let's not forget who cheated first with Sandy Thompson." Her face flushed with indignation as she pointed an accusing finger at me. I didn't react with anger, though. Instead, I laughed, hard and uncontrollably. It wasn't a polite chuckle, but a deep, almost hysterical laugh that brought tears to my eyes. "Oh, Sandy Thompson," I said, catching my breath. "Let's talk about Sandy Thompson. The woman you've used to justify 15 years of betrayal. Incredible. I'll never forget the day you warned me not to say her name in this house, or you'd take the kids and leave me. And guess what? You followed through on every threat. But let me tell you something, Miranda." I leaned forward, my voice steady now. "I never touched Sandy Thompson." Miranda froze, her eyes widening in shock. For a brief moment, her defiant posture faltered, and confusion flickered across her face. The weight of finally saying those words lifted something heavy off my chest, and I took a deep breath, continuing in a steadier tone. "When I woke up that morning in her bed, I was still wearing my tuxedo," I said. "Nothing happened between us." Her expression hardened again. "Do you seriously expect me to believe that?" she snapped, her voice sharp with sarcasm. "Yes, I do," I replied, meeting her glare with unwavering resolve. "Because I've never lied to you, not then and not now. I have no reason to lie to you, Miranda, especially now that we're long done." She scoffed, dismissing my words with a wave of her hand. "Whatever. Believe what you want," she muttered, her tone dripping with indifference. The casual way she brushed me off reminded me of our daughter Kelly's habit of shutting down conversations she didn't want to have. Miranda's dismissiveness sparked a flare of frustration in me. I needed her to believe me, though I couldn't entirely explain why it mattered so much. Gritting my teeth, I grabbed my phone and set it to speaker, motioning for Miranda to stay quiet. She hesitated but didn't protest as the call connected. After a few rings, Jane, the receptionist at my old office, answered with her usual warmth. "Hi, Jane, it's Alan Dowd," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, Alan," Jane greeted, her tone cheerful. "Wrapping everything up before your big move? It's going to be so different without you around." "Yeah, just finishing up," I replied. "Listen, I'm trying to get in touch with someone from the Little Rock office, Sandy Thompson. Could you check if she's still with us?" "Of course, 1 second." The sound of rapid typing filled the silence as Jane searched. After a brief pause, she returned. "Yes, she's still at the Little Rock branch. Do you need her number, or should I transfer you?" "Please transfer me, Jane, and take care of yourself. If Paul finally pops the question, you better send me an invitation," I teased lightly. Jane giggled. "You know I will, Alan. Don't forget about us either. I'm connecting you now." As the call transferred, I glanced at Miranda. She was watching me intently, her brow furrowed in suspicion. Before I could say anything, a familiar voice came through the speaker. "Hello, this is Sandy Thompson." "Hi, Sandy. It's Alan Dowd from the Greenville office. I'm not sure if you remember me," I began cautiously. "Alan Dowd!" she exclaimed, laughing warmly. "Of course, I remember you. How could I forget? The man I wanted but never got. And now after all these years, you call me out of the blue. How have you been?" Before I could answer, she launched into a rapid stream of chatter. "It must be fate, because I was just thinking about you recently. Can you believe it's been 16 years since we last spoke? I think the last time was at that gala in Washington where we met. Those events were always so hectic, so many people, so much going on. It was impossible to have a proper conversation." "Yes, I remember that night," I said, cutting in gently. "It was actually 17 years ago, but to be honest, I don't recall much after the awards ceremony. That was the one and only time I ever got that drunk." "Oh, Alan, you were absolutely hilarious that evening," she said, her voice tinged with amusement. "What do you even remember?" "I remember my awkward thank you speech," I replied, chuckling, "and the champagne we shared afterward. But beyond that, a complete blur." Miranda's expression shifted as she listened, a mix of curiosity and something unreadable flickering across her face. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally confronting the ghost of Sandy Thompson. Not just for Miranda, but for myself. Sandy's laughter rang through the speaker, carefree and unrestrained. "Oh, Alan, by the end of that night you were gone. Although in my opinion you didn't drink nearly as much as some of the others." She paused briefly, then added with a teasing edge, "How about a little honesty for honesty? What do you say?" "By all means, Miss Thompson," I replied, playing along. "Hit me with it." "Well," she began, her tone light and playful, "I have to confess, I had my eye on you that evening, although I wasn't the only one. Every single woman in that room seemed to be vying for your attention. A tall, dark-haired, fit guy like you? You were like honey surrounded by a swarm of bees." Her infectious laughter filled the room again, and I couldn't help but join in. Miranda, however, remained stiff and tense. Her lips pursed in a sour expression as she listened. "When I pulled you onto the dance floor," Sandy continued with a mischievous lilt, "let's just say I accidentally let my hand wander a bit lower than I should have. What can I say? You were, impressively built, and I almost fainted on the spot," she chuckled wickedly. "But being called Miri all night? That stung a little. At least it was clear how much you loved your wife." Miranda's face instantly paled, the color draining as Sandy's words hit her. Meanwhile, Sandy's voice continued, unaware of the emotional impact her story was having. "Anyway," Sandy went on, her tone light and conversational, "at some point you mumbled, 'Miri, my love,' one last time before passing out in your chair. By the time the party ended, everyone else had gone to their rooms, but there you were, still completely out cold in the hall. I couldn't just leave you there, so I asked the night porter to help me get you to bed." "Huh," I murmured, my curiosity piqued. "I don't remember any of that." "Well," Sandy said, chuckling, "the porter and I didn't know which room was yours, and the hotel's computer system was down for maintenance. None of the key cards had room numbers on them, so we were stuck. There wasn't much of a choice. I brought you to my room instead. And let me tell you, getting a guy your size into bed wasn't easy, especially since you could barely stand, let alone move." There was a pause on the line, followed by the sound of faint rustling. After a moment, Sandy spoke again, her voice light and amused. "Sorry about that. I needed a sip of water. Talking about all this made my throat dry," she said, laughing. "Anyway, where was I? Oh, right. Once we got you into my room, I have to admit I was tempted to get a little adventurous." Her voice softened, tinged with embarrassment. "While we were lifting you onto the bed, I, accidentally noticed some very impressive attributes. Let's just say you're not only tall, but well-proportioned. I couldn't help but wonder what might have been." She laughed again, but then sighed. "Of course, you were completely out of it, muttering nonsense before collapsing on the bed. As much as I wanted you, I could never do anything with someone in that condition. That's just not my style. So, I stripped down and lay beside you, hoping you'd wake up and notice me. But when I woke up the next morning, you were already gone. I didn't see you again for the rest of the weekend, no matter how hard I looked. Honestly, Alan, your wife was lucky to have you." Miranda covered her mouth with both hands, her wide eyes betraying the shock overtaking her. The weight of her actions and the years of misguided anger seemed to crash down on her all at once. I felt no sympathy. Her rash decisions, her arrogance, and years of calculated schemes had destroyed not only our marriage, but so much more. "Well, about that," I replied dryly. "She's now my ex-wife, and honestly, Sandy, if I'd known back then what I know now, I might have taken you up on that offer." Sandy laughed heartily. "Well, Alan, you're about 7 years too late. I'm happily married now with 2 wonderful kids. I still go by Thompson at work because my clients know me by that name, but officially, it's Sandy Roberts. I met Rob 8 years ago, and he's the first man since you who managed to win my heart." Miranda's face contorted with pain as she gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Her gaze was fixed on the phone as if it were something venomous poised to strike. "Funny enough," Sandy continued, her tone cheerful, "it's because of Rob that I started thinking about you again. His older brother Dan is getting married in a couple of weeks to a woman named Andy Daoud. Isn't that your last name? I wondered if she was a relative of yours." That explains Miranda's reaction," I said, smirking at my ex-wife. "No, I don't have any relatives named Andy. At least not anymore. I think I had a cousin by that name years ago, but she hated being called Andy. She thought it made her sound like a boy." Miranda blushed furiously, turning away as her shame deepened. "Well, no one would mistake her for a boy now. Andy's stunning, and her kids, Kelly and Luke, are amazing. Kelly is best friends with Dan's daughter, Cassie. They're roommates in Florida. Luke was an usher at my wedding and did a fantastic job with the ceremony. Rob told me that Dan and Andy had been on and off for 13 years before finally making it official. Can you imagine?" Sandy finished with a laugh. I glanced at Miranda. Her face was flushed, and her trembling hands still gripped the table. I could only think of one thing. I never really knew her at all. That brief revelation told me everything I needed to know. It confirmed that Miranda's parents had been aware of her relationship with Dan all along, and had actively supported it. Whenever Miranda was away, I'd call her, only to be met with endless excuses from her parents about why she couldn't come to the phone. Without fail, she'd return my call later, but the pattern was clear now. As Sandy's words from earlier replayed in my mind, I found myself nodding absent-mindedly to her chatter. Suddenly, her tone shifted, serious and subdued. She lowered her voice as though she were about to share a secret. "Alan, to be honest, I don't think they should get married. Even if they go through with it, it's bound to fail." Her words surprised me. "Why do you say that? They've been together for so long." "What could possibly stop them now?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. Miranda, sitting across from me, seemed even more stunned. Her eyebrows shot up, and her mouth fell slightly open as she edged closer, waiting for Sandy's response. "Oh, Alan," Sandy sighed, "because they're both serial cheaters. This isn't a foundation for a successful marriage. Dan didn't just cheat on his first wife, Lisa. He cheated with Andy. And Lisa? She was stunning. I never met her, but I've seen pictures. Anyway, one day, Andy and I had a really candid conversation. She told me something that still blows my mind. Apparently, her husband and kids knew all about her double life. She had a husband at home and a husband at work. And it didn't end there. Her husband at home had a similar arrangement with someone he worked with. Can you even imagine living like that? Unbelievable, I muttered, trying to catch Miranda's eyes. But she refused to look at me. Her face flushed deep red, her chest rising and falling with quick, uneven breaths. "I told Rob," Sandy continued with a tone of firm conviction, "that if he ever even thought about pulling something like that, he'd lose everything. No hesitation." Then, almost casually, she dropped another bombshell. "And you know Dan's still at it. Even now, while he's engaged to Andy, he's got someone on the side. Her name's Tilly, and he sees her every time he's in Chicago. Rob told me Dan even arranges business trips just so he can visit her every couple of weeks." I watched as Miranda's complexion shifted dramatically, from bright red to pale, then almost green. She leaned forward, gasping for breath, her hands gripping the table for support. It looked like she might throw up at any moment. Sandy carried on, oblivious to Miranda's state. "Honestly, Alan, I don't think they'd even be getting married if Dan's bosses hadn't forced his hand. Apparently, Andy's ex-husband sued their company after she divorced him, and the whole thing turned into a huge mess. Can you believe it? Her home husband clearly had a very different understanding of their arrangement and wasn't about to put up with it. Thank goodness for men with standards, huh?" She paused briefly, then added, "Rob told me the company paid out a hefty settlement, 6 figures at least, to make it all go away. On top of that, Dan was given an ultimatum. Marry Andy or find another job. Can you imagine starting a marriage like that? Still sneaking around with other women while you're basically being blackmailed into tying the knot?" At that moment, Miranda bolted upright, her chair toppling over as she stumbled toward the bathroom. Moments later, the unmistakable sound of retching echoed through the house. I couldn't blame her. Everything she'd built her life around, her carefully constructed narrative, had just been shattered. The man she believed was honest and devoted turned out to be a fraud. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I stayed on the phone with Sandy a little longer as she shifted the conversation to happier topics. She spoke with pride about her 2 kids and asked about my plans for the future. I told her about my upcoming move and my new job opportunity. At the recommendation of my former company, I had applied for a role with an insurance firm near my mother's house. This time, instead of sales, I'd be investigating suspicious claims, a challenging and intriguing new direction for my career. The salary wouldn't match what I used to earn, but it was enough to meet my needs. Plus, the position came with a personal office and an assistant. Professionally, I was back on track, cautiously optimistic about what lay ahead. By the time I hung up, Miranda had returned to the table, her face pale and her expression distant. I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. The truth had done all the talking for me. As I ended my call with Sandy, exchanging numbers and agreeing to stay in touch occasionally, Miranda stumbled back into the room, visibly drained. She clung to the walls for support, her steps unsteady. When I finally hung up, I turned to see my ex-wife in a disheveled state. Her face was pale and streaked with tears, her carefully applied makeup smudged or wiped away entirely. In just 15 minutes, she looked as though she had aged years. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking as she collapsed into a chair. She buried her face in her arms, shoulders shaking with sobs. For the first time in a long while, I believed her. "I am too, Miranda. I really am," I replied softly. Then, glancing at my watch, I added, "But I don't have time to dwell on this right now. I need to head out and follow up on something while the opportunity's still fresh. By morning, I need to be in Brunswick." The drive was about 6 hours if I didn't stop, though I knew I'd need a break or two along the way. I gestured toward a pile of boxes stacked near the entrance. "Those are all yours. Clothes, photos, and the other things you left behind. I was planning to ship them to you next week, but since you're here, I can load them into your car if that helps." My tone was calm, polite, reflective of the manners my parents had instilled in me. Miranda hesitated, her voice barely audible when she finally spoke. "Actually, could I ask you a favor?" She avoided meeting my eyes, staring instead at the floor. "Can I stay here tonight? I don't think I can go home right now." I considered her request for a moment, absent-mindedly jingling my keys. Finally, I unhooked two and placed them on the table in front of her. "Sure, why not?" I said with a shrug. "Here are the keys. Stay as long as you need to, but when you leave, drop them off at the real estate office. The new tenants move in on Monday, so you've got 9 days to use the place if you need it. On Sunday, people are coming by to help me clear out the junk and clean the apartment. Utilities will stay on until Monday morning." My gaze swept the room one last time, making sure I hadn't forgotten anything. Spotting the farewell card my former colleagues had given me still sitting on the mantel, I walked over and picked it up. It was a small reminder of their warmth and support, something I'd carry with me to my new start. "All right, that's it," I said, turning back to Miranda. "Take care of yourself. I have to go now. Goodbye, Miri. I hope this is the last time we ever see each other." With that, I stepped toward the door, pausing briefly to glance over my shoulder. The woman I had once loved with everything I had now sat hunched at the table, her entire body trembling with silent, gut-wrenching sobs. That image, her broken and alone, was the last memory I took with me as I walked out the door and into the next chapter of my life. The drive to Brunswick that night was heavy with thought. The hum of the car engine and the rhythm of the tires against the road created a soothing backdrop as my mind replayed the events of the past few hours. Miranda's sobs, her pale face, and her broken demeanor were fresh in my memory. Despite the pain she had caused me, seeing her reduced to such a vulnerable state evoked a pang of sympathy I hadn't expected. But sympathy wasn't enough to rewrite history, nor did it diminish the scars we had inflicted on each other over the years. As the highway stretched on, illuminated by the soft glow of the moon, I thought about my new beginning. For so long, my life had been defined by responsibilities, providing for my family, holding together a crumbling marriage, and carrying the weight of unspoken truths. Now, for the first time in nearly 2 decades, the road ahead was mine alone to navigate. It was a daunting and exhilarating realization. Arriving in Brunswick just before dawn, I checked into a modest motel. The air was thick with the smell of pine and salt water, a reminder of the small coastal town's proximity to the ocean. As I unpacked my overnight bag, I came across the farewell card from my colleagues. Their words of encouragement brought a smile to my face, a rare and genuine moment of lightness. "Here's to new horizons," one of them had written, and for the first time I allowed myself to believe it was possible. The following day, I met with the hiring manager at the insurance firm. The position was everything I had hoped for, challenging, meaningful, and far removed from the relentless sales quotas that had once consumed me. By the end of the meeting, I had secured the job, along with a start date that gave me enough time to settle into my new life. In the weeks that followed, I moved into a small but comfortable rental house near my mother's care facility. Visiting her became a daily ritual. Some days she recognized me, her face lighting up with joy as she called me by name. Other days she stared at me blankly, lost in the fog of her illness. On those days, I would sit beside her, holding her hand and sharing stories of my childhood, hoping to spark a glimmer of familiarity. Though she rarely responded, I found solace in those quiet moments, knowing I was giving her the care and love she deserved. Meanwhile, my work provided a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Investigating insurance claims required meticulous attention to detail and a keen sense of judgment, skills I had honed over the years but never fully appreciated. Each case was a puzzle to solve, and the satisfaction of uncovering the truth was deeply fulfilling. My colleagues were kind and supportive, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. But life wasn't without its challenges. My relationship with Luke and Kelly remained strained. Despite my efforts to reach out, their responses were polite but distant. I couldn't blame them. Years of resentment and misunderstandings had created a chasm that couldn't be bridged overnight. Yet, I held on to hope that time and patience might heal the wounds. One afternoon, while visiting my mother, I received an unexpected call. It was Sandy Thompson. Her warm, familiar voice brought an instant sense of ease. We chatted about our lives, her children, and her thriving marriage. When I mentioned my struggles with Luke and Kelly, she offered a perspective that stayed with me. "Alan," she said gently, "you can't force them to come back to you. All you can do is be there when they're ready. Keep reaching out, even if they don't respond. They may not realize it now, but one day they'll see how much you care." Her words resonated deeply, and I resolved to keep trying, no matter how small the gestures. Months turned into years, and life slowly began to rebuild itself. My mother passed away peacefully in her sleep, leaving behind a legacy of love and resilience. At her funeral, I was joined by a handful of close friends and colleagues who had become my surrogate family. To my surprise, Luke and Kelly also attended, their presence a testament to the bonds that still lingered beneath the surface. After the service, Kelly approached me with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said softly, "for everything." It was a moment of reconciliation I hadn't dared to hope for, and as we embraced, I felt a weight lift from my heart. Luke was more reserved, but as he shook my hand, his grip was firm, and his eyes held a flicker of recognition. "Let's talk soon," he said simply, and I knew it was a start. As the years continued to unfold, I found myself embracing the unexpected joys of a simpler life. I took up woodworking, crafting intricate pieces that blended utility with artistry. The act of creating something tangible brought a sense of accomplishment I hadn't experienced before. I also began volunteering at a local community center, mentoring young adults navigating their own challenges. Sharing my story with all its triumphs and failures became a way to connect and inspire others. One day, while sifting through old photographs, I came across a picture of Miranda and me from our college days. We were laughing, carefree, and full of dreams. Though our journey had ended in heartbreak, the photo reminded me of the love and hope that had once united us. It was a bittersweet reminder that even the most painful chapters of our lives shape who we are. Looking back, I realized that life's greatest lessons often come from the moments we least expect. The heartbreak, the betrayal, and the loss had been devastating, but they had also given me the strength to rebuild, to find purpose, and to rediscover myself. As I stood on the porch of my home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, I welcomed the unknown with open arms. Life, after all, is a journey. A series of beginnings and endings, each one a chance to grow, to learn, and to start anew. And in that moment, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. Life settled into a quiet rhythm, one marked by simplicity and purpose. My days were split between work, where I continued to uncover the stories behind each case, and the woodworking projects that had become my passion. My evenings were often spent reflecting on the paths that had brought me here, recognizing that the pieces of my life, fractured as they had been, were slowly coming together in new and unexpected ways. Kelly and Luke remained central to this transformation. Kelly surprised me one weekend with a visit, a box of her bakery's best pastries in hand. "I thought you could use some company," she said, smiling shyly as she settled onto my couch. We talked for hours, delving into memories of her childhood and dreams for the future. She shared how proud she was of her bakery, attributing its foundation to the lessons I'd taught her about perseverance and hard work. Hearing her say that felt like a long-lost part of myself had been returned. Luke, though more reserved, found his own ways to reconnect. On one particular afternoon, he called me unexpectedly. "Dad," he said, his voice steady but uncharacteristically warm. "I'm working on a project for school, and I think your experience might help. Can we talk about it?" The conversation that followed was technical and focused, but underneath I could sense an openness, a willingness to bridge the gaps that had once felt insurmountable. The more I engaged with my children, the more I realized how much they had grown into remarkable individuals, despite, and perhaps because of, the challenges they had faced. Their resilience became a source of inspiration, a reminder that even the most difficult chapters of life can lead to unexpected strength. Beyond family, my days were filled with small but meaningful connections. At the community center where I volunteered, I found myself mentoring a group of young adults, teaching them not just woodworking but also the value of patience, craftsmanship, and pride in their efforts. One of them, a bright and curious teen named Marcus, reminded me of Luke in his younger years. Full of questions and eager to learn,